Chapter 1. Dark Work. A burning thing can make all kind of smells. A live tree, fresh and sappy, smells different ablaze to a dead one, dry and withered. A pig alight and a man smell much the same, but there's another story. This burning that the dogman smelled now, that was a house. He knew it sure as sure, a smell he knew better than I'd have liked. Houses don't burn on their own too often. Usually there's some violence in it. That meant men around, most likely, and ready for a fight. So he crept right careful down between the trees, slid on his belly to the edge, and peered out through the brush. He saw it now. Right enough. Black smoke in a tall pillar, rising up from a spot down near the river. A small house, still smoking, but burned down to the low stone walls. There'd been a barn too, but nothing more now than a pile of black sticks and black dirt, a couple of trees and a patch of tilled earth. It was a poor enough living at the best of times, farming this far north, too cold to grow much, a few roots maybe, and some sheep to herd. A pig or two, if you were lucky. Dogman shook his head. Who'd want to burn folks as poor as this? Who'd want to steal this stubborn patch of land? Some men just like to burn, he reckoned. He eased out a touch further, looking right and left down the valley for some sign of the ones as did this. But a few stringy sheep spread out across the valley sides was all he could see moving. He wriggled back into the brush. His heart sank as he sneaked back towards the camp. Voices raised and arguing, as ever. He wondered for a minute whether to just go past and keep on going. He was that sick of the endless bickering. He decided against it in the end, though. It ain't much of a scout who leaves his people behind. Why don't you shut your hole, Dow? Tuldurus' rumbling voice. You wanted south, and when we went south all you did was moan about the mountains. Now we're out of the mountains you grumble on your empty belly all day and all night. I've had my fill of it. You whining dog. Now came Black Dow's nasty growl. Why should you get twice as much to eat, just 'cause you're a great fat pig? You little bastard. I'll crush you like the worm you are. I'll cut your neck while you sleep, you great pile of meat. Then we'll all have plenty to eat. At least we'd all be rid of your fucking snoring. I know now why they named you Thunderhead, you rumbling sow. Shut your holes, the pair of you. Dogman heard 3 trees roaring loud enough to wake the dead. I'm sick of it. He could see them now, the 5 of them. Tulduru and Black Dow, bristling up to one another. 3 trees in between them with his hands up. Forley sat watching, just looking sad, and Grim, not even watching, checking his shafts. Aye, hissed Dogman, and they all snapped round to look at him. It's the Dogman, said Grim, barely looking up from his arrows. There was no understanding that man. He spoke nothing at all for days on end. Then when he did speak, it was to say what they could all see already. Forley was keen to distract the lads, as always. It was a hard guess how long they'd keep from killing each other without him around. What did you find, Dogman? He asked. What do you know? I found 5 stupid fucking bastards out in the woods, he hissed, stepping out from the trees. I could hear them from a mile away, and they were named men, these, would you believe? Men who should have known better, fighting among themselves as always. 5 stupid bastards. 3 trees raised his hand. All right, Dogman, we should know better. And he glowered at Tull and Dow. They glowered at each other, but they said nothing more. What did you find? There's fighting going on hereabouts, or something like it. I seen a farm burning. Burning, say you? Asked Tull. Aye. 3 trees frowned. Take us to it, then. The Dogmen hadn't seen this from up in the trees. Couldn't have. Too smoky and too far to see this. He saw it now, though, right up close, and it made him sick. They all saw it. This is some dark work here, all right, said Forley, looking up at the tree. Some dark work, aye, mumbled Dogman. He couldn't think of aught else to say. The branch creaked as the old man swung slowly round, his bare feet dangling near the earth. Might have been he tried to fight. He'd got 2 arrows through him. The woman was too young to be his wife. His daughter, maybe. The Dogman guessed the 2 young ones were her children. Who'd hang a child? He muttered. I can think of some black enough, said Tull. Dow spat on the grass, meaning me. He growled, and the 2 of them were off again like hammer on anvil. I burned some farms, and a village or 2 and all, but there were reasons. That was war. I let the children live. I heard different, said Tull. Dogman closed his eyes and sighed. You think I give a dog's arse for what you heard? Dow barked. Might be my name's blacker than I deserve, you giant shit. I know what you deserve, you bastard. Enough, growled Three Trees, frowning up at the tree. Have you no respect? The dogman's right. We're out of the mountains now and there's trouble brewing. There'll be no more of this squabbling. No more? Quiet and cold from now on, like the wintertime. We're named men with men's work to do. Dogman nodded, happy to hear some sense at last. There's fighting nearby, he said. There has to be, said Grim, though it was hard to say exactly what he was agreeing with. Three Trees' eye was still fixed on the swinging bodies. Wee Tree's eye was still fixed on the swinging bodies. You're right. We need to put our minds on that now. On that and nothing else. We'll track the crowd as did this and see what they're fighting for. We'll do no good until we know who's fighting who. Whoever did this fights for Bethard, said Dow. You can tell just by the looking. We'll see. Tull and Dow, cut these folks down and bury 'em. Maybe that task will put some steel back in you. The two of them scowled at each other, but Three Trees paid him no mind. Dogman, you go and sniff out those as did this. Sniff 'em out, and we'll pay 'em a visit tonight. A visit like they paid to these folks here? Aye, said Dogman, keen to get on and do it. We'll pay 'em a visit. The dogman couldn't work it out. If they were in a fight, these lot, afraid of being caught out by an enemy, they weren't making too much of an effort to cover their tracks. He followed them simple as could be. 5 of them, he reckoned, must have strolled nice and easy away from the burning farm, down through the valley beside the river and off into the woods. The tracks were so clear he got a little worried time to time, thinking they must be playing some trick on him, watching out there in the trees, waiting to hang him from a branch. Seemed they weren't, though, 'cause he caught up to them just before nightfall. First of all, he smelled their meat-mutton roasting. Next, he heard their voices talking, shouting, laughing, making not the meanest attempt to stay quiet. Easy to hear even with the river bubbling beside. Then he saw them, sitting round a great big fire in a clearing, a sheep's carcass skinned on a spit above it, taken from those farmers, no doubt. The dogmen crouched down in the bushes, nice and still like they should have been. He counted 5 men, or 4 and a boy about 14 years. They were all just sitting, no one standing guard, no caution at all. He couldn't work it out. They're just sitting there, he whispered when he got back to the others. Just sittin'. No guard, no nothing. Just sitting, asked Forley. Aye, 5 of 'em, sitting and laughing. I don't like it. I don't like it neither, said Three Trees. But I like what I saw at that farm still less. Weapons, hissed Dow. Weapons it has to be. For once, Tull agreed with him. Weapons, cheap. Let's give 'em a lesson. Not even Forley spoke up for staying out of a fight this time, but Three Trees thought it out for a bit still, taking his moment, not to be hurried. Then he nodded. Weapons it is. You won't hear him neither, but the dogmen knew he was there as he crept down through the trees. You fight with a man for long enough, you get an understanding. You learn how he thinks, and you come to think the same way. Dow was there. The dogman had his task. He could see the outline of the one on the far right, his back a black shape against the fire. Dogman didn't spare too much thought for the others yet. He spared no thought for anything but his task. Once you choose to go, or your chief chooses for you, you go all the way, and never look back till the task's done. The time you spend thinking is the time you'll get killed in. Logen taught him that, and he'd taken it right to heart. That's the way it has to be. Dogman crept closer and closer still, feeling the warmth of the fire on his face, feeling the hard metal of the knife in his hand. By the dead he needed to piss, as always. The task wasn't but a stride away now. The boy was facing him. If he'd have looked up fast from his meat, he'd have seen the dogmen coming, but he was too busy eating. "Gurg!" shouted one of the others. That meant Dowd got to him, and that meant he was finished. Dogman leaped forward and stabbed his task in the side of the neck. He reared up for a moment, clutching at his cut throat, took a stumble forward and fell over. One of the others jumped up, dropping his half-chewed leg of mutton on the ground. Then an arrow stuck him through the chest. Grim, out by the river. He looked surprised a minute. Then he sank down on his knees, face twisted up with pain. That left but 2, and the boy was still sitting there, staring at the dogman, mouth half open with a bit of meat hanging out of it. The last of them was stood up, breathing quick, with a long knife in his hand. He must have had it out for eating with. "Drop the blade," bellowed Three Trees. The dogmen saw the old boy now, striding towards them, the firelight catching the metal rim of his big round shield. The man chewed on his lip, eyes flicking from dogman to Tao as they moved slowly to either side of him. Now he saw the thunderhead looming out of the darkness in the trees, seeming too big to be a man, his great huge sword glinting over his shoulder. That was enough for him. He threw his knife down in the dirt. Tao jumped forward, grabbed his wrists and tied them tight behind him, then shoved him down on his knees beside the fire. The dogman did the same with the boy, his teeth clenched tight, not saying a word. The whole thing was done in an instant, quiet and cold like Three Trees said. There was blood on Dogman's hands, but that was the work and couldn't be helped. The others were making their way over now. Grim came sloshing through the river, throwing his bow across his shoulder. He gave the one he shot a kick as he came past, but the body didn't move. Dead, said Grim. Forley was at the back, peering at the two prisoners. Tao was staring at the one he'd tied, staring at him hard. I know this one here, he said, sounding quite pleased about it too. Grow the mire, ain't it? What a chance. You've been gnawing at the back of my mind for some time. The mire scowled down at the ground. A cruel-looking sort, the dogman thought. The type that might hang farmers if there was one. I am the mire. No need to ask your names. When they find you've killed some of the king's collectors, you'll be dead men all. Black Dow, they call me. The mire's head came up, his mouth wide open. Oh, fuck, he whispered. The boy kneeling next to him stared round with big eyes. Black Dow? You what? Not the same Black Dow as Arch. Oh, fuck. Dow nodded slowly, with that nasty smile spreading across his face. That killing smile. Grow the mire. You've all kind of work to pay for. I've had you in my mind, and now you're in my eye. He patted him on the cheek, and in my hand too. What a happy chance. The mire snatched his face away as far as he could, trussed up like he was. I thought you were in hell, Black Dow, you bastard. So did I. But I was only north of the mountains. We've questions for you, Mire, before you get what's due. Who's this king? What is it you're collecting for him? Fuck your questions. Three Trees hit him on the side of his head hard, where he couldn't see it coming. What's the fight? Asked Three Trees. We ain't fighting, spat the Mire through his broken teeth. You might as well be dead, you bastards. You don't know what's happened, do you? Dogman frowned. He didn't like the sound of this. Sounded like things had changed while they were gone, and he'd never yet seen a change for the better. I'll do the questions here, said Three Trees. You just keep your tiny mind on the answers to M. Who's still fighting? Who want Neil to Bethod? The Mire laughed. Even tied up like he was, there's no one left. The fighting's over. Bethod's king now. King of all the North. Everyone kneels to him. Not us, rumbled Tall Duru, leaning down. What about old man y'all? Dead. What about Sithing? Or Rattleneck? Dead and dead, you stupid fucks. The only fighting now's down south. Bethod's gone to war with the Union. Aye, and we're giving him a beating too. The dogman wasn't sure whether to believe it. King? There'd never been a king in the North before. There'd never been a need for one, and Bethod was the last one he'd have chosen, and making war on the Union. That was a fool's errand, surely. There were always more Southerners. Surely. There were always more Southerners. If there's no fighting here, asked the dogman, what you killing for? Fuck yourself. Tull slapped him in the face, hard, and he fell on his back. Dow put in a kick of his own, then dragged him up straight again. What did you kill him for? Asked Tull. Taxes, shouted the Mire with blood trickling out of his nose. Taxes, asked the dogman. A strange word, all right. He barely knew the meaning of it. They wouldn't pay. Taxes for who? Asked Dow. For Bethod? Who do you think? He took all this land, broke the clans up, and took it for his own. The people owe him. And we collect? Taxes, eh? That's a fucking Southern fashion and no mistake. And if they can't pay? Asked Dogman, feeling sick to his guts. You hang 'em, do you? If they want pay, we can do as we please with 'em. As you please. Tull grabbed him round the neck, squeezing with his great big hand till the Mire's eyes were half popping out. As you please? Does it please you to hang him? All right, thunderhead, said Dow, peeling Tull's big fingers away and pushing him gently back. All right, big lad, this ain't for you to kill a man tied up, and he patted him on the chest, pulling out his axe. "It's for work like this you bring along a man like me." The Meyer had more or less got over his throttling now. "Thunderhead," he coughed, looking round at them. "It's the whole lot of you, ain't it? You're 3 trees and grim, and that's the weakest there. So you don't kneel, eh? Good for fucking you. Where's Ninefingers, eh?" jeered the Meyer. "Where's the bloody 9? Dow turned round, running his thumb down the edge of his axe. "Gone back to the mud, and you're joining him. We've heard enough. Let me up, bastard," shouted the Meyer, struggling at his ropes. "You're no better'n me, Black Dow. You've killed more folk than the plague. Let me up and give me a blade. Come on." "You scared to fight me, you coward. Scared to give a fair chance, are you? Call me coward, would you?" growled Dow. "You who's killed children for the sport of it? You had a blade and you let it drop. That was your chance and you should have took it. The likes as you don't deserve another. If you've anything to say worth hearing, you best say it now." "Shit on yer," screamed the Meyer. "Shit on the pack of Dows." Axe cracked him hard between the eyes and knocked him on his back. He kicked a little, then that was it. Not a one of them shed too big a tear for that bastard. Even Forley gave no more than a wince when the blade went in. Dow leaned over and spat on his corpse, and the dogman hardly blamed him. The boy was something more of a problem, though. He stared down at the body with big, wide eyes. Then he looked up. "You're them, ain't you?" he said. "Them as Ninefingers beat." "Aye, boy," said 3 Trees. "We them. I heard stories about you. What you going to do with me?" "Well, there's the question, ain't it?" Dogman muttered to himself. Shame was, he already knew the answer. "He can't stay with us," said 3 Trees. "We can't take the baggage, and we can't take the risk." "He's just a lad," said Forley. "We could let him go." It was a nice thought, but it wasn't holding much water, and they all knew it. The boy looked hopeful, but Tull put an end to that. "We can't trust him, not here. He'd tell someone we were back, and then we'd be hunted. Can't do it. Besides, he had his part in that work at the farm." "But what choice did I have?" asked the boy. "What choice? I wanted to go south. Go south and fight the Union, and earn myself a name. But they sent me here to get taxes. My chief says do a thing. I got to do it, don't I?" "You do," said 3 Trees. "No one says you could have done different. I didn't want no part of it. I told him to let the young ones be. You got to believe me." Forley looked down at his boots. "We do believe you, but you're going to fucking kill me anyway." Dogman chewed at his lip. "Can't take you with us. Can't leave you be. I didn't want no part of it." The boy hung his head. "Don't hardly seem fair." "It ain't," said 3 Trees. "It ain't fair at all." "But there it is." Dow's axe hacked into the back of the lad's skull, and he sprawled out on his face. The dogman winced and looked away. He knew Dow did it that way so they wouldn't have to look at the boy's face. A good idea, most likely, and he hoped it helped the others, but face up or face down was all the same to him. He felt almost as sick as he had back at the farm. It wasn't the worst day he'd ever had, not by a long way. But it was a bad one. The dogmen watched him filing down the road from a good spot up in the trees where no one could see him. He made sure it was downwind from M2 'cause, being honest, he was smelling a bit ripe. It was a strange old procession. On the one hand, they looked like fighting men, off to a weapon take and then to battle. On the other hand, they were all wrong. Old weapons mostly, and odds and sods of mixed-up armor. Marching but loose and ragged. Most of them too old to be prime fighters, gray hair and bald heads, and a lot of the rest too young for beards, hardly more than boys. Seemed to the dogman like nothing made sense in the north no more. He thought on what the Meyer had said before Dow killed him. War with the Union. Were these lot off to war? If they were, then Bethard must have been scraping the pot. "What's to do, dogman?" asked Forley, as he stepped back into the camp. "What's happening down there?" "Men, armed but none too well. 50 or more. Young and old mostly, heading south and west," and the dogman pointed off down the road. 3 Trees nodded, towards England. "He means it then, Bethard. He's making war on the Union all the way. No amount of blood's enough for that one. He's taking every man can hold a spear." That was no surprise in its way. Bethard had never been one for half measures. He was all or nothing and didn't care who got killed along the road. "Every man," muttered 3 Trees to himself. If the Shanka come over the mountains now. Dogman looked round, frowning, worried, dirty faces. He knew what Three Trees was saying. They could all see it. If the Shanka came now, with no one left in the north to fight him, that business at the farm would be the best of it. "We got to warn someone," shouted Forley. "We got to warn them." Three Trees shook his head. "You heard the mire. Yall's gone and Rattleneck and Sithing. All dead and cold and gone back to the mud. Bethud's king now, king of the Northmen." Black Dow scowled and gobbed in the dirt. "Spit all you like, Dow, but facts is facts. There's no one left to warn." "No one but Bethud himself," muttered the dogman, miserable at having to say it. "Then we got to tell him." Forley looked round them all, desperate. "He may be a heartless bastard, but at least he's a man. He's better than the Flatheads, ain't he? We got to tell someone." "Ha!" barked Dow. "Ha! You think he'll listen to us, weakest? You forgotten what he told us? Us and Ninefingers too. Never come back. You forgotten how close he come to killing us? You forgotten how much he hates each one of us?" "Fears us," said Grim. "Hates and fears us," muttered Three Trees. "And he's wise too, because we're strong, named men, known men, the type of men that others will follow." Tull nodded his big head. "Aye, there'll be no welcome for us at Carlion, I'm thinking. No welcome without a spike on the end of it." "I'm not strong," shouted Forley. "I'm the weakest, everyone knows that. Bethud's got no reason to fear me, nor to hate me neither. I'll go." Dogman looked at him surprised. They all did. "You?" asked Dow. "Aye, me. I may be no fighter, but I'm no coward neither. I'll go and talk to him. Maybe he'll listen." Dogman stood and stared. It was so long since any one of them had tried to talk their way out of a fix he'd forgotten it could be done. "Might be Hull listen," muttered Three Trees. "He might listen," said Tull. "Then he might bloody kill you, weakest." Dogman shook his head. "It's quite a chance, maybe, but it's worth the doing, ain't it?" They all looked at each other, worried. It was some bones that Forley was showing, no doubt, but the dogman didn't much like the sound of this for a plan. He was a thin thread to hang your hopes on, was Bethud. A mighty thin thread, but like Three Trees said, there was no one else. Chapter 2. Words and Dust. Kosta pranced around the outside of the circle, his long golden hair bouncing on his shoulders, waving to the crowd, blowing kisses to the girls. The audience cheered and howled and whooped as the lithe young man made his flashy rounds. He was an Aduan, an officer of the King's Own, a local boy, and so very popular. Bremer Dan Gorst was leaning against the barrier, watching his opponent dance through barely open eyes. His steels were unusually heavy-looking, whitey and worn and well-used. Too heavy to be quick, perhaps. Gorst himself looked too heavy to be quick. Come to that, a great thick-necked bull of a man, more like a wrestler than a swordsman. He looked the underdog in this bout. The majority of the crowd seemed to think so. But I know better. Nearby, a bet-maker was shouting odds, taking money from the babbling people around him. Nearly all of the bets were for Kirster. Glokta leaned across from his bench. "What odds are you giving on Gorst now?" "On Gorst?" asked the bet-maker Evans. "I'll take 200 marks. Sorry, friend, I can't cover that." 100, then, at 5-4. The bet-maker thought about it for a moment, looking skywards as he worked out the sums in his head. Done. Glokta sat back as the referee introduced the contestants, watching Gorst roll up his shirt sleeves. The man's forearms were thick as tree trunks, heavy cords of muscles squirming as he worked his meaty fingers. He stretched his thick neck to one side and the other. Then he took his steels from his second and loosed a couple of practice jabs. Few in the crowd noticed. They were busy cheering Kirster as he took his mark. But Glokta saw, quicker than he looks. A lot quicker. Those heavy steels no longer seem so clumsy. "Bremer Dan Gorst," shouted the referee, as the big man trudged to his mark. The applause was meager indeed. This lumbering bull was no one's idea of a swordsman. Begin. It wasn't pretty. From the very start, Gorst swung his heavy long steel in great heedless sweeps, like a champion woodsman chopping logs, giving throaty growls with every blow. It was a strange sight. One man was in a fencing contest. The other seemed to think he was fighting to the death. You only have to touch him, man, not split him in half. But as Glokta watched, he realized the mighty cuts were not nearly so clumsy as they seemed. They were well-timed and highly accurate. Kirster laughed as he danced away from the first great swing, smiled as he dodged the third, but by the fifth his smile was long gone. And it doesn't look like coming back. It wasn't pretty at all. But the power is undeniable. Kirster ducked desperately under another great arching cut. That one was hard enough to take his head off. Blunted steels, or no? The crowd's favorite did his best to seize the initiative, jabbing away for all he was worth, but Gorst was more than equal to it. He grunted as he turned the jabs efficiently away with his short steel, then growled again as he brought his long whistling around and over. Glokta winced as it smashed into Kirster's sword with a resounding crash, snapping the man's wrist back and nearly tearing the steel from his fingers. He stumbled back from the force of it, grimacing with pain and shock. Now I realize why Gorst's steel seemed so worn. Kirster dodged around the circle, trying to escape the onslaught, but the big man was too quick. Far too quick. Far too quick. Gorst had the measure of him now, anticipating every movement, harrying his opponent with relentless blows. There was no escape. Two heavy thrusts drove the hapless officer back towards the edge of the circle, then a seething cut ripped his long steel from his hand and embedded it, wobbling wildly back and forth in the turf. He staggered for a moment, eyes wide, his empty hand trembling. Then Gorst was on him, letting go a roar and ramming full tilt into his defenseless ribs with a heavy shoulder. Glokta spluttered with laughter. I never saw a swordsman fly before. Kirster actually turned half a somersault, shrieking like a girl as he tumbled through the air, crashing to the ground with his limbs flopping and sliding away on his face. He finally came to rest in the sand outside the circle, a good 3 strides from where Gorst had hit him, groaning weakly. The crowd was in shock, so quiet that Glokta's cackling had to be audible on the back row. Kirster's trainer rushed from his enclosure and gently turned his stricken student over. The young man kicked weakly, whimpered and clutched at his ribs. Gorst watched for a moment, emotionless, then shrugged and strolled back to his mark. Kirster's trainer turned to the referee. "I am sorry," he said, "but my pupil cannot continue." Glokta could not help himself. He had to clamp his mouth shut with his hands. His whole body was shaking with laughter. Each gurgle caused a painful spasm in his neck, but he didn't care. It seemed the majority of the crowd had not found the spectacle quite so amusing. Angry mutterings sprang up all around him. The grumbling turned to boos as Kirster was helped from the circle, draped between his trainer and his second, then the boos to a chorus of angry shouts. Gorst swept the audience with his lazy, half-open eyes, then shrugged again and trudged slowly back to his enclosure. Glokta was still sniggering as he limped from the arena, his purse a good deal heavier than when he arrived. He hadn't had that much fun in years. The university stood in a neglected corner of the Agrient, directly in the shadow of the house of the maker, where even the birds seemed old and tired. A huge, ramshackle building, coated in half-dead ivy, its design plainly from an earlier age. It was said to be one of the oldest buildings in the city, and it looks it. The roofs were sagging in the middle, a couple of them close to outright collapse. The delicate spires were crumbling, threatening to topple off into the unkempt gardens below. The render on the walls was tired and grimy, and in places whole sections had fallen away to reveal the bare stones and crumbling mortar beneath. In one spot, a great brown stain flared out down the wall from a section of broken guttering. There had been a time when the study of sciences had attracted some of the foremost men in the Union, when this building had been among the grandest in the city. And Sult thinks the Inquisition is out of fashion. 2 statues flanked the crumbling gate. 2 old men, one with a lamp, one pointing at something in a book, Wisdom and Progress or some such rubbish. The one with the book had lost his nose some time during the past century. The other was leaning at an angle. His lamp stuck out despairingly as though clutching for support. Glokta raised his fist and hammered on the ancient doors. They rattled, moved noticeably, as if they might at any moment drop from their hinges. Glokta waited some time. There was a sudden clatter of bolts being drawn back, and one half of the door wobbled open a few inches. An ancient face wedged itself into the gap and squinted out at him, lit underneath by a meager taper clutched in a withered hand. Dewy old eyes peered up and down. "Yes, Inquisitor Glokta." "Ah, from the Archlector." Glokta frowned, surprised. Yes, that's right. They cannot be half so cut off from the world as they appear. He seems to know who I am. It was perilously dark within. 2 enormous brass candelabras stood on either side of the door, but they were stripped of candles and had long gone unpolished, shining dully in the weak light from the porter's little taper. "This way, sir," wheezed the old man, shambling off, bent nearly double. Even Glokta had little trouble keeping up with him as he crept away through the gloom. They shuffled together down a shadowy hallway. The windows on one side were ancient, made with tiny panes of glass so dirty that they would have let in little enough light on the sunniest of days. They let in none whatever as the sullen evening came on. The flickering candle flame danced over dusty paintings on the opposite wall. Pale old men in dark gowns of black and gray, gazing wild-eyed from their flaking frames. Flasks and cogwheels and pairs of compasses clutched in their aged hands. "Where are we going?" asked Glokta, after they had shambled through the murk for several minutes. "The Adepti are at dinner," wheezed the porter, glancing up at him with eyes infinitely tired. The university's dining hall was an echoing cavern of a room, lifted 1 degree above total darkness by a few guttering candles. A small fire flickered in an enormous fireplace, casting dancing shadows among the rafters. A long table stretched the length of the floor, polished by long years of use, flanked by rickety chairs. It could easily have accommodated 80, but there were only 5 there, crowded up at one end, huddled in around the fireplace. They looked over as the taps of Glokta's cane echoed through the hall, pausing in their meals and peering over with great interest. The man at the head of the table got to his feet and hurried over, holding the hem of his long black gown up with one hand. "A visitor," wheezed the porter, waving his candle in Glokta's direction. "Ah, from the Archlector." "I am Silber, the university administrator." And he shook Glokta's hand. His companions had meanwhile lurched and tottered to their feet as though the guest of honor had just arrived. "Inquisitor Glokta." He stared round at the eager old men. "A good deal more deference than I was expecting, I must say. But then, the Archlector's name opens all kinds of doors." "Glokta, Glokta," mumbled one of the old men. "Seems that I remember a Glokta from somewhere." "You remember everything from somewhere, but you never remember where," quipped the administrator, to half-hearted laughter. "Please, let me make the introductions." He went round the 4 black-gowned scientists one by one. Saurizin, our Adeptus Chemical, a beefy, unkempt old fellow with burns and stains down the front of his robe and more than one bit of food in his beard. Denka, the Adeptus Metallic. The youngest of the 4 by a considerable margin, though by no means a young man, had an arrogant twist to his mouth. Jezal, our Adeptus Mechanical. Glokta had never seen a man with so big a head but so small a face. His ears in particular were immense and sprouting gray hairs. And Candelao, the Adeptus Physical, a scrawny old bird with a long neck and spectacles perched on his curving beak of a nose. "Please join us, Inquisitor," and the administrator indicated an empty chair, wedged in between 2 of the Adeptii. "A glass of wine, then," wheedled Jezal, a prim smile on his tiny mouth, already leaning forward with a decanter and sloshing some into a glass. "Very well. We were just discussing the relative merits of our various fields of study," murmured Candelao, peering at Glokta through his flashing spectacles. "As always," lamented the administrator, "the human body is, of course, the only area worthy of true scrutiny," continued the Adeptus Physical. "One must appreciate the mysteries within before turning one's attention to the world without. We all have a body, Inquisitor. Means of healing it and of harming it are of paramount interest to us all. It is the human body that is my area of expertise." "Bodies, bodies," whined Jezal, pursing his little lips and pushing food around his plate. "We are trying to eat." "Quite so. You are unsettling the Inquisitor with your ghoulish babble." "Oh, I am not easily unsettled." Glokta leered across the table, giving the Adeptus Metallic a good view of his missing teeth. "My work for the Inquisition demands a more than passing knowledge of anatomy." There was an uncomfortable silence. Then Saurizin took hold of the meat plate and offered it out. Glokta looked at the red slices glistening on the plate. He licked at his empty gums. "Thank you, no? Is it true?" asked the Adeptus Chemical, peering over the meat, voice hushed. "Will there be more funds?" Now that this business with the Mercers is settled, that is, Glokta frowned. Everyone was staring at him, waiting for his reply. One of the old adepti had his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. So that's it. Money. But why would they be expecting money from the Archlector? The heavy meat plate was beginning to wobble. Well, if it gets them listening. Money might be made available depending, of course, on results. A hushed murmur crept around the table. The Adeptus Chemical carefully set down the plate with a trembling hand. I have been having a great deal of success with acids recently. Ha ha! Mocked the Adeptus Metallic. Results! The Inquisitor asked for. Results! My new alloys will be stronger than steel when they are perfected. Always the alloys, sighed Chale, turning his tiny eyes towards the ceiling. No one appreciates the importance of sound mechanical thinking. The other three Adepti rounded fiercely on him. But the administrator jumped in first. Gentlemen, please. The Inquisitor is not interested in our little differences. Everyone will have time to discuss their latest work and show its merits. This is not a competition, is it, Inquisitor? Every eye turned toward Glokta. He looked slowly round at those old, expectant faces, and said nothing. I have developed a machine for my acids, my alloys, the mysteries of the human body. Glokta cut them off. Actually, it is in the area of, I suppose you would call them explosive substances, that I am currently taking a particular interest. The Adeptus Chemical jumped from his seat. That would be my province, he cried, staring in triumph at his colleagues. I have samples. I have examples. Please follow me, Inquisitor. And he tossed his cutlery onto his plate and set off towards one of the doors. Sorozin's laboratory was precisely as one would have expected, almost down to the last detail. A long room, with a barrel-vaulted ceiling, blackened in places with circles and streaks of soot. Shelves covered most of the wall space, brimming with a confusion of boxes, jars, bottles, each filled with its own powders, fluids, rods of strange metal. There was no apparent order to the positions of the various containers, and most had no labels. Organization does not appear to be a priority. The benches in the middle of the room were even more confused, covered in towering constructions of glass and old brown copper. Tubes, flasks, and dishes, lamps, one with a naked flame burning, all gave the appearance of being ready at any moment to collapse, dousing anyone unfortunate enough to stand nearby with lethal boiling poisons. The Adeptus Chemical rummaged in amongst this mess, like a mole in its warren. Now then, he mumbled to himself, pulling at his dirty beard with one hand. Blasting powders are somewhere here. Glokta limped into the room after him, glancing suspiciously around at the mess of tubing that covered every surface. He wrinkled his nose. There was a revolting, acrid smell to the place. Here it is, crowed the Adeptus, brandishing a dusty jar half full of black granules. He cleared a space on one of the benches, shoving the clinking and clanking glass and metal out of the way with a sweep of his meaty forearm. This stuff is terribly rare, you know, Inquisitor. Terribly rare. He pulled out the stopper and tipped a line of black powder onto the wooden bench. Few men have been fortunate enough to see this stuff in action. Very few, and you are about to become one of them. Glokta took a cautious step back, the size of the ragged hole in the wall of the Tower of Chains still fresh in his mind. We are safe, I hope, at this distance. Absolutely, murmured Sorozin gingerly, holding a burning taper out at arm's length and touching it to one end of the line of powder. There is no danger whatso. There was a sharp pop and a shower of white sparks. The Adeptus Chemical leaped back, nearly blundering into Glokta and dropping his lighted taper on the floor. There was another pop, louder, more sparks. A foul-smelling smoke began to fill the laboratory. There was a bright flash and a loud bang, a weak fizzling, and that was all. Sorosin flapped the long sleeve of his gown in front of his face, trying to clear the thick smoke that had now thrown the whole chamber into gloom. Impressive, eh, Inquisitor? He asked, before dissolving into a fit of coughing. Not really. Glokta ground the still-flaming taper out under his boot and stepped through the murk towards the bench. He brushed aside a quantity of grey ash with the side of his hand. There was a long, black burn on the surface of the wood, but nothing more. The foul-smelling fumes were indeed the most impressive effect, already clawing at the back of Glokta's throat. It certainly produces a great deal of smoke, he croaked. It does, coughed the Adeptus proudly, and reeks to high heaven. Glokta stared at that blackened smear on the bench. If one had a large enough quantity of this powder, could it be used to, say, knock a hole through a wall? Possibly. If one could accumulate a large enough quantity, who knows what could be done? As far as I know, no one has ever tried. A wall, say, 4 feet thick? The Adeptus frowned. Perhaps, but you'd need barrels of the stuff. Barrels? There isn't that much in the whole Union, and the cost, even if it could be found, would be colossal. Please understand, Inquisitor, that the components must be imported from the distant south of Kanta, and are rarities even there. I would be happy to look into the possibility, of course, but I would need considerable funding. Thank you again for your time. Glokta turned and began to limp through the thinning smoke towards the door. I have made some significant progress with acids recently, cried the Adeptus, voice cracking. You really should see those as well. He took a shuddering breath. Tell the Archlector, significant progress. He dissolved into another fit of coughing, and Glokta shut the door tightly behind him. A waste of my time. Our Bayaz could not have smuggled barrels of powder into that room. Even then, how much smoke, how great a smell would it have made? A waste of my time. Silber was lurking in the hallway outside. Is there anything else that we can show you, Inquisitor? Glokta paused for a moment. Does anyone here know anything about magic? The administrator's jaw muscles clenched. A joke, of course. Perhaps magic, I said. Silber narrowed his eyes. You must understand that we are a scientific institution. The practice of magic, so-called, would be most inappropriate. Glokta frowned at the man. I'm not asking you to get your wand out, fool. From a historical standpoint, he snapped. The Magi and so on. Bayaz, from a historical standpoint, I see. Silber's taut face relaxed slightly. Our library contains a wide range of ancient texts, some of them dating back to the period when magic was considered. Less remarkable, who can assist me? The administrator raised his brows. I am afraid that the Adeptus Historical is, something of a relic. I need to speak with him, not fence with him. Of course, Inquisitor, this way. Glokta grabbed the handle of an ancient-looking door, studded with black rivets, began to turn it. He felt Silber seize his arm. No! He snapped, guiding Glokta away down a corridor beside. The stacks are down here. The Adeptus Historical seemed indeed to be a part of ancient history himself. His face was a mask of lined and sagging half-transparent skin. Sparse hairs, snowy white, stuck unkempt from his head. There were only a quarter as many as there should have been, but each was 4 times longer than you would expect, hence his eyebrows were thin, yet sprouted out to impressive length in all directions, like the whiskers of a cat. His mouth hung slack, weak, and toothless. Hands were withered gloves, several sizes too big. Only his eyes showed any trace of life, peering up at Glokta and the administrator as they approached. Visitors, is it? Croaked the old man, apparently talking to a large black crow perched on his desk. This is Inquisitor Glokta, bellowed the administrator, leaning down towards the old man's ear. Glokta, from the Archlector, is it? The Adeptus Historical squinted up with his ancient eyes. He's somewhat deaf, Silber murmured, but no one knows these books like he does. He thought about it for a moment, peering round at the endless stacks, disappearing into the gloom. No one else knows these books at all. Thank you, said Glokta. The administrator nodded and strode off towards the stairs. Glokta took a step towards the old man, and the crow leaped from the table and scrambled into the air, shedding feathers flapping madly around the ceiling. Glokta hobbled painfully back. I was sure the damn thing was stuffed. He watched it suspiciously until it clattered to a halt on top of one of the shelves and perched there motionless, staring at him with its beady yellow eyes. Glokta pulled out a chair and dropped into it. I need to know about Bayaz. Bayaz, muttered the ancient Adeptus. The first letter in the alphabet of the old tongue, of course. I didn't know that. The world's brimming full of what you don't know, young man. The bird gave a sudden harsh caw, horribly loud in the dusty silence of the stacks. Brimming full. Then let's begin my education. It's the man Bayaz I need to know about. The first of the Magi. Bayaz. The name great Juvens gave to his first apprentice. 1 letter, 1 name. First apprentice, first letter of the alphabet, you understand. I'm just about keeping up. Did he really exist? The ancient adeptus scowled. Unquestionably. Did you not have a tutor as a young man? I did, unfortunately. Did he not teach you history? He tried, but my mind was on fencing and girls. Ah, I lost interest in such things a long time ago. So did I. Let us return to Bayaz, the old man sighed. Long ago, before there was a union, Midderland was made of many petty kingdoms, often at war with one another, rising and falling with the passing years. One of these was ruled by a man called Herod, later to become Herod the Great. You've heard of him, I assume, of course. Bayaz came to Herod's throne room and promised to make him king of all Midderland if he did as he was told. Herod, being young and headstrong, did not believe him, but Bayaz broke the long table with his art. Magic, eh? So the story goes. Herod was impressed, understandable, and he agreed to accept the advice of the Magus, which was to make his capital here in Adua, to make peace with certain neighbors, war with others, and when and how to do it. The old man squinted across at Glokta. Are you telling this story, or am I? You are, and you're taking your time about it. Bayaz was good as his word. In time, Midderland was unified. Herod became its first high king. The union was born. Then what? Bayaz served as Herod's chief counselor. Our laws and statutes, the very structure of our government, all are said to be his inventions, little changed since those ancient days. On Herod's death he left the union, promising one day to return. I see. How much of this is true, do you think? Hard to say. Magus, wizard, magician? The old man looked at the flickering candle flame. To a savage, that candle might be magic. It's a fine line indeed between magic and trickery, eh? But this Bayaz was a cunning mind in his day. That's a fact. This is all useless. What about before? Before what? Before the Union. Before Herod. The old man shrugged. Record-keeping was hardly a priority during the Dark Ages. The whole world was in chaos after the war between Juvens and his brother Canidius. The master maker? Aye, Canidius. He stares down from the walls of my little room in the cellars beneath Severod's charming townhouse. Juvens dead, his 11 apprentices, the Magi, marching to avenge him. I know this tale, Canidius, murmured Glokta. The image of that dark figure with the flames behind clear in his mind. The master maker. Was he real? Hard to say. He's in the ground between myth and history, I suppose. Probably there's some grain of truth in it. Someone must have built that big bloody tower, eh? Tower? The house of the maker. The old man gestured at the room around them. And they say he built all this as well. What, this library? The old man laughed. The whole Agrient, or at least the rock on which it stands. The university, too. He built it, appointed the first adepti to help him with his works, whatever they were, to look into the nature of things. We here are the Maker's disciples, after a fashion. Where did he go? Dead. Your friend Bayaz killed him. Glokta raised an eyebrow. Did he really? So the story goes. Have you not read The Fall of the Master Maker? That rubbish? I thought it was all invention. So it is. Sensational claptrap. But based on writings from the time. Writings? Such things survive? The old man narrowed his eyes. Some? You have them here? One in particular. Glokta fixed the old man with his eye. Bring it to me. The ancient paper crackled as the Adeptus Historical carefully unrolled the scroll and spread it out on the table. The parchment was yellow and crumpled, edges rough with age, scrawled with a dense script. Strange characters, utterly unintelligible to Glokta's eye. What is it written in? The old tongue. Few can read this now. The old man pointed to the first line. An account of the fall of Canidius. This says, the third of three. Of 3 scrolls, I presume. Where are the other 2? Lost, huh? Glokta peered into the endless darkness of the stacks. It's a wonder anything can be found down here. What does this one say? The ancient librarian peered down at the strange writing, poorly illuminated by the single flickering candle, his trembling forefinger tracing across the parchment, his lips moving silently. Great was their fury. What? That's how it begins. Great was their fury. He began slowly to read. The Magi pursued Canidius, driving his faithful before them. They broke his fortress, laying ruin to his buildings and killing his servants. The Maker himself, sore wounded in the battle with his brother Juvens, took refuge in his house. The old man unrolled a little more. 12 days and 12 nights. The Magi threw their wrath against the gates, but could not mark them. Then Bias found a way inside. The Adeptus swept his hand over the parchment in frustration. Damp or something had blurred the characters in the next section. "I can't make this out. Something about the Maker's daughter. You sure?" "No," snapped the old man. "There's a whole section missing." "Ignore it then. What's the next thing you can be sure of?" "Well, let's see." Bias followed him to the roof and cast him down. The old man noisily cleared his throat. The Maker fell burning and broke upon the bridge below. The Magi searched high and low for the seed but could not find it. "Seed?" asked Glokta, baffled. "That's all that's written? What the hell does it mean?" The old man sagged back in his chair, evidently enjoying this rare opportunity to hold forth on his area of expertise. The end of the age of myth, the beginning of the age of reason. Bias, the Magi, they represent order. The Maker is a godlike figure. Superstition, ignorance, I don't know. There must be some truth to him. After all, someone built that big bloody tower, and he wheezed with breathy laughter. Glokta could not be bothered to point out that the Adeptus had made the very same joke a few minutes before, and it wasn't funny then. Repetition, the curse of the old. What about this seed? Magic, secrets, power. It's all a metaphor. I will not impress the Archlector with metaphors, especially bad ones. Is there no more? It goes on a bit? Let's see. He looked back at the symbols. He broke on the bridge. They searched for the seed. Yes, yes. Patience, Inquisitor. His withered finger traced across the characters. They sealed up the house of the Maker. They buried the fallen, Canidius and his daughter among them. That's all. He peered at the page, his finger hovering over the last few letters, and Bias took the key. That's all. Glokta's eyebrows went up. What? What was that last bit? They sealed the gates, they buried the fallen, and Bias took the key. The key. The key. The key to the house of the Maker. The Adeptus Historical squinted back at the page. That's what it says. There is no key. That tower has stood sealed for centuries. Everyone knows it. Our impostor will have no key, that's sure. Slowly, Glokta began to smile. It is thin. It is very thin. But with the right setting, the right emphasis, it might be enough. The Archlector will be pleased. I'll be taking this. Glokta pulled the ancient scroll over and started to roll it up. What? The eyes of the Adeptus were wide with horror. You can't. He staggered up from his chair even more painfully than Glokta might have done. His crows scrambled up with him, flapping around near the ceiling and croaking in a fury, but Glokta ignored them both. You can't take it. It's irreplaceable, wheezed the old man, making a hopeless grab for the scroll. Glokta spread his arms out wide. Stop me. Why don't you? I'd like to see it. Can you imagine? We two cripples floundering around in the stacks with a bird loosing its droppings on us, tugging this old piece of paper to and fro. He giggled to himself. That wouldn't be very dignified, would it? The Adeptus Historical, exhausted by his pitiful efforts, crumpled back into his chair, breathing hard. No one cares about the past anymore, he whispered. They don't see that you can have a future without a past. How very deep. Glokta slipped the rolled-up parchment into his coat and turned to leave. Who's going to look after the past when I'm gone? Who cares? Asked Glokta as he stalked towards the steps. As long as it isn't me. Chapter 3. The Remarkable Talents of Brother Longfoot. The cheering had woken Logen every morning for a week. It started early, ripping him from his sleep, loud as a battle close at hand. He'd thought it was a battle when he first heard it, but now he knew it was just their damn stupid sport. Closing the window brought some relief from the noise, but the heat soon became unbearable. It was sleep a little or sleep not at all, so he left the window open. Logen rubbed his eyes, cursing, and hauled himself from his bed. Another hot, tedious day in the city of white towers. On the road, in the wild, he'd be alert as soon as his eyes opened, but here things were different. The boredom and the heat were making him slow and lazy. He stumbled across the threshold into the living room, yawning wide and rubbing at his jaw with one hand. He stopped. There was someone in there, a stranger, standing at the window, bathed in sunlight with his hands clasped behind him, a small, slight man, with hair shaved close to his knobbly skull and strange, travel-worn clothes faded, baggy cloth wrapped round and round his body. Before Logen had a chance to speak, the man turned and sprang nimbly over to him. "And you are?" he demanded. His smiling face was deeply tanned and weather-beaten, like the creased leather on a favorite pair of boots. It made it impossible to guess his age. He could have been anywhere from 25 to 50. "Ninefingers," muttered Logen, taking a cautious step back towards the wall. "Ninefingers, yes." The little man pressed forwards and seized Logen's hand in both of his, gripping it tightly. "It is an honor and privilege most profound," he said, closing his eyes and bowing his head, "to make your acquaintance. You've heard of me. Alas, no, but all God's creatures are worthy of the deepest respect." He bowed his head again. "I am Brother Longfoot, a traveler of the illustrious order of navigators. There are few lands beneath the sun upon which my feet have not trodden." He pointed down towards his well-worn boots, then spread his arms wide. "From the mountains of Thand to the deserts of Shamir, from the plains of the Old Empire to the silver waters of the Thousand Isles, all the world is my home. Truly," he spoke the northern tongue well, better than Logen himself perhaps. "And the north too? One brief visit in my youth. I found the climate somewhat harsh. You speak the language well enough. There are few tongues that I, Brother Longfoot, cannot speak. An effortless skill with languages is but one among my many remarkable talents." The man beamed. "God has truly blessed me," he added. Logen wondered if this might be some elaborate joke. "What brings you here?" "I have been sent for." His dark eyes sparkled. "Sent for? Indeed I have. By Bias, the first of the Magi, I have been sent for, and I have come. That is my way. A most generous contribution to the coffers of the Order has been made in return for my remarkable talents, but I would have come without it. Indeed, without it. Really, indeed." The small man stepped away and started to stride around the room at a terrific pace, rubbing his hands together. The challenge of this assignment spoke as much to the pride of the Order as to its well-documented greed, and it was I who was selected, from all the navigators within the circle of the world, for this task. I, Brother Longfoot, I and no other, who in my position, of my reputation, could resist such a challenge. He stopped before Logen, and looked up at him expectantly, as if waiting for an answer to his question. Not I," shouted Longfoot, setting off on another circuit of the room. "I did not resist it. Why would I? That would not be my way. To journey to the very edge of the world, what a tale that will make! What an inspiration to others! What on the edge of the world?" asked Logen suspiciously. "I know," the strange man clapped him on the arm. "We are equally excited. This must be our navigator." Bias emerged from his room. "I am indeed, Brother Longfoot, at your service, and you are, I presume, none other than my illustrious employer, Bias, the first of the Magi. I am he. It is an honor and a privilege most profound," cried Longfoot, springing forward and seizing the Magus by the hand, "to make your acquaintance. Likewise, I trust your journey was a pleasant one." "Journeys are always, it is the time between them that I find trying." "Indeed it is." Bias frowned over at Logen, but he could only shrug his shoulders. "May I ask how long it will be until we begin our journey? I am most keen to embark. Soon, I hope, the last member of our expedition will arrive. We will need to charter a ship, of course. It shall be my particular pleasure to do so. What shall I tell the captain of our course? West across the Circle Sea, to Starixa, then on to Chalcis in the Old Empire." The little man smiled and bowed low. "You approve?" "I do, but ships rarely pass to Chalcis now. The Old Empire's endless wars have made the waters dangerous thereabouts. Piracy, alas, is rife. It may be difficult to find a captain willing. This should help." Bias tossed his ever-bulging purse onto the table. "It should indeed. Make sure the ship is fast. Once we are ready, I do not wish to waste a day." "On that you may depend," said the navigator, scooping up the heavy bag of coins. To sail in slow vessels is not my way. No, I will find for you the fastest ship in all Adua. Yes, she shall fly like the breath of God. She shall skip over the waves like merely fast will do. The little man inclined his head. The time of departure? Within the month. Bias looked at Logen. Why don't you go with him? Ah, yes, shouted the navigator. We will go together. He grabbed Logen by the elbow and began to pull him towards the door. I will expect some change, Brother Longfoot, called Bias from behind. The navigator turned in the doorway. There will be change. On that you may depend. An eye for value, a flair for barter, a dauntless purpose in negotiation. These are but three, and he smiled broadly, of my remarkable talents. It is a fabulous place, this Adua, truly. Few cities are its equal. Shaffa, perhaps, is larger, but so very dusty. None could deny that Westport and Dagaska have their sights. Some think of Austria, on its mountain slopes, as the most beautiful city of the world. But Brother Longfoot's heart, it must be said, belongs to great Talons. Have you been there, Master Ninefingers? Have you seen that noble settlement? Logen was busy trying to keep up with the little man dodging between the endless flow of people. Longfoot stopped so suddenly that Logen almost piled into him. The navigator turned, his hands raised, a faraway look in his eye. Talons at sunset, seen from the ocean. I have witnessed many remarkable things, believe me, but I declare that to be the most beautiful sight in all the world. The way the sun gleams on the myriad canals, on the glinting domes of the Grand Duke's citadel, on the graceful palaces of the merchant princes. Where now does the shining sea end, and the shining city begin? Ah, Talons! He turned and charged off once more, and Logen hurried after him. But this Adua is a fine place, certainly, and growing every year. Things have changed a great deal here since my last visit, indeed they have. Once there were only noblemen and commoners. The noblemen owned the land, so they had the money and therefore the power. Simple, you see. Well, Logen was having trouble seeing much further than Longfoot's back. But now they have trade, and so much of it. Merchants and bankers and so forth. Everywhere. Armies of them. Now commoners can be rich, you see. You see, and a rich commoner has power. Is he a commoner now, or a nobleman, or is he something else? Very complicated all of a sudden. No, there's so much wealth, so much money, but so much poverty too, eh? So many beggars, so many poor, hardly healthy, so rich and so poor, so close together. But it's a fine place still, and always growing. I find it too crowded, mumbled Logen as a shoulder barged past him. And too hot? Bah! Crowded? Do you call this crowded? You should see the great temple in Shaffa at morning prayer, or the grand square before the emperor's palace when new slaves are up for auction. And hot? Do you call this hot? In Ulsafain, in the far south of Gurkul, it gets so hot during the summer months that you can cook an egg on your doorstep. Truly, this way. He ducked through the passing crowds towards a narrow side street. This way is the quickest. Logen caught him by the arm. Down there? He peered into the gloom. You sure? Can you doubt it? Demanded Longfoot, suddenly horrified. Can it be that you could doubt it? Among all my remarkable talents, it is my skill at navigation that is paramount. It is for that talent, above all, that the first of the Magi has made so generous a contribution to the coffers of the order. Could it be that you— But wait. He held up his hand and began to smile again, then tapped Logen on the chest with his forefinger. You do not know Brother Longfoot, not yet. You are watchful and cautious, I see it, fine qualities in their place. I cannot expect you to have my unshakable faith in my abilities. No, that would not be fair. Unfairness is not an admirable quality. No, unfairness is not my way. I meant, I shall convince you, shouted Longfoot. Indeed I shall. You will come to trust my word before your own. Yes, this way is the quickest. And he strode off down the dingy alleyway with remarkable speed, Logen struggling to keep up though his legs were a good half-foot longer. Ah, the back streets, called the navigator over his shoulder as they passed down dark and grimy lanes, the buildings crowding and ever closer. The back streets, eh? The alleys grew narrower, darker, and dirtier still. The little man turned to the left and the right. never pausing for an instant to consider his course. "Do you smell that? Do you smell that, Master Ninefingers? It smells like—" He rubbed his thumbs and fingertips together as he strode along, searching for the words. "Mystery. Adventure. It smelled like shit to Logen." A man lay on his face in the gutter, dead drunk perhaps, or maybe simply dead. Other men passed by, limping and haggard, or standing in threatening groups in doorways, handing round bottles. There were women here too. 4 marks, and I'll give you a blessing, Northman. One of them called to Logen as they passed. "A blessing you won't soon forget." "3 then, whores," whispered Longfoot, shaking his head. "And cheap ones too. You like women. Well, you should go to Ulnab, my friend. Ulnab on the shores of the southern sea. You could buy a bed slave there. Indeed you could. They cost a fortune, but they train these girls for years." "You can buy a girl?" asked Logen, mystified. "Boys too, if your taste bends that way, eh? They train them for years, truly. It's a whole industry down there. You want skill, do you? These girls have skills you wouldn't believe. Or visit Sapani. There are places in that city few. The women are beautiful, beautiful, everyone. Truly, like princesses. And clean," he muttered, peering at one of the scruffy women by the roadside. A bit of dirt didn't bother Logen any. Skilled and beautiful all sounded too complicated to him. One girl caught his eye as they passed, leaning against a doorframe with one arm up, watching them pass with a half-hearted smile. Logen found her pretty, in a desperate sort of a way. Prettier than he was, anyway, and it had been a long time. You have to be realistic about these things. Logen stopped in the street. "Bayaz want to change?" he muttered. He did. He was most specific on the subject. "There's money to spare, then?" Longfoot raised one eyebrow. "Well, perhaps, let me see." He pulled out the purse with a flourish and opened it, rooting around inside. There was a loud jingling of coins. "You think that's a good idea?" Logen glanced nervously up and down the street. Several faces had turned towards them. "What's that?" asked the navigator, still poking around in the purse. He pulled some coins out, holding them up to the light and peering at them, then pressed them into Logen's palm. "Subtlety isn't one of your talents, is it?" Some of the shabby men in the alley began to move slowly, curiously towards them, 2 from in front, 1 from behind. "No, indeed," laughed Longfoot. "No, indeed, I am a straight-talking man, that is my way." "Yes, indeed, I am a—" He had noticed the shadowy figures sidling towards them now. This is unfortunate." She slammed the door shut in his face. Other doors up and down the street began to close. "Shit," he said. "How are you at fighting?" "God has seen fit to bless me with many remarkable talents," murmured the navigator. "But combat is not one of them." One of the men had an ugly squint. "That's a big purse for a little man," he said as he came close. "Well," murmured Longfoot, creeping behind Logen's shoulder. "An awful big load for a little man to carry," said the other. "Why not let us help you with it?" Neither one of them had weapons ready, but by the way their hands were moving, Logen knew they had them. There was a third man behind him too. He could sense him moving forwards now. Close, closer than the other 2. If he could deal with that one first, the one behind, his chances might be good. He couldn't risk looking round. That would spoil the surprise. He'd simply have to hope for the best. As always, Logen gritted his teeth and flung his elbow backwards. It hit the man behind in the jaw with a heavy crunch, and Logen caught his wrist in his other hand, which was lucky because he had a knife out and ready. Logen smashed him in the mouth with his elbow again, tearing the blade from his limp fingers as he dropped into the street, head smacking against the dirty cobbles. He whipped round, half expecting to get stabbed in the back, but the other 2 hadn't moved too quick. They had knives of their own out, and one had taken a half-step towards him, but he paused when he saw that Logen had the blade up, ready to fight. It was a meager kind of a weapon, 6 inches of rusty iron without even a crosspiece, but it was better than nothing. A lot better. Logen waved it around in the air in front of him, just to make sure that everyone could see it. Felt good. His odds were much improved. "Right then," said Logen. "Who's next?" The other 2 moved apart, trying to get to either side of him, weighing their knives in their hands, but they didn't seem in any great rush to come on. "We can take him," whispered the squinter, but his friend didn't look too sure. "Or you can have this." Logen opened up his clenched fist, showing the coins that Longfoot had given him. "And leave us be. This much I can spare." He swished the knife around a bit more, just to add some weight to his words. "This is what you're worth to me, this much. No more. What's it to be?" The one with the squint spat on the ground. "We can take him," he hissed again. "You go first. You fucking go," shouted the other. "Just take what I'm offering," said Logen. "Then we none of us have to go." The one that he'd elbowed groaned and rolled over in the road, and the reminder of his fate seemed to decide them. "All right, you fucking northern bastard. All right, we'll take it." Logen grinned. He thought about throwing the coins at the one with the squint, then stabbing him while he was distracted. That's what he'd have done in his youth, but he decided against. Why bother? Instead, he opened his fingers and tossed the money into the road behind him, moving towards the nearest wall. He and the two thieves circled each other cautiously, each step taking them closer to the coins and him closer to escape. Soon they'd swapped places, and Logen backed away down the street, still holding the knife in front of him. When they were 10 paces apart, the two men squatted down and began to pick the scattered coins up from the ground. "I'm still alive," Logen whispered to himself as he quickened his pace. That had been lucky, he knew. It's a fool who thinks that any fight is too small to be the death of him, however tough he is. Lucky that he caught the one behind just right. Lucky that the other two had been slow. But then he'd always been lucky with fights. Lucky at getting out of them alive. Not so lucky with the getting into them. Still, he felt good about this day's work. Glad he hadn't killed anybody. Logen felt a hand clap him on the back, and he span round, knife at the ready. "Only me?" Brother Longfoot held up his hands. Logen had nearly forgotten the navigator was there. He must have stayed behind him the whole time, perfectly silent. "Well handled, Master Ninefingers. Well handled, truly. I see that you are not without some talents of your own. I am looking forward to traveling with you. I am indeed. The docks are this way," he shouted, already moving off. Logen took one last look back at the two men, but they were still grubbing around on the ground, so he threw the knife away and hurried to catch up to Longfoot. "Do you navigators never fight? Some among us do, oh yes, with empty hands and weapons of all kinds. Most deadly, some of them, but not I. No, that is not my way. Never, never. My skills lie elsewhere. I would have thought your travels would bring you across many dangers." "They do," said Longfoot brightly. "They do indeed. That is when my remarkable talent for hiding is at its most useful." Chapter 4. Her kind fight everything. Night. Cold. The salt wind was keen on the hilltop, and Pharaoh's clothes were thin and ragged. She hugged her arms and hunched up her shoulders, staring sourly down towards the sea. The Glokta was a cloud of pinprick lights in the distance, huddled around the steep rock between the great curving bay and the glistening ocean. Her eyes could make out the vague, tiny shapes of walls and towers, black against the dark sky, and the thin neck of dry earth that joined the city to the land. An island, almost. Between them and the Glokta, there were fires. "Camps around the roads. Many camps," the Glokta whispered Yulwai, perched on a rock beside her, a little splinter of the Union, stuck into Gurkhol like a thorn in the Emperor's pride. "Huh," grunted Pharaoh, hunching her shoulders still further. "The city is watched. Many soldiers, more than ever. It might be difficult to deceive so many." "Perhaps we should go back," she muttered hopefully. The old man ignored her. "They are here as well. More than one, eaters. I must go closer. Find a way in. Wait here for me." He paused, waiting for her to reply. "You will wait? All right," she hissed. "All right, I'll wait." Yulwai slipped off his rock and away down the slope, padding across the soft earth, almost invisible in the inky blackness. When the sound of his jingling bangles had faded into the night, she turned away from the city, took a deep breath, and scurried down the slope southwards, back into Gurkhol. Now Pharaoh could run, fast as the wind, hours at a stretch. She'd spent a lot of time running. When she made it to the base of the hill, she ran, feet flying across the open ground, breath coming quick and fierce. She herded water beyond, slid down a bank and splashed into the shallows of a slow-moving river. She floundered on, knee-deep in the cold water, Let the old bastard track me through this, she thought. After a while, she made a bundle of her weapons and held them above her head as she swam across, forcing against the current with one arm. She flapped out on the other side and ran on along the bank, wiping the water from her dripping face. Time passed slowly, and light began to creep into the sky. Morning was coming. The river babbled beside her, her sandals beating out a rapid rhythm in the stubbly grass. She left the river behind, running on across the flat landscape, turning now from black to gray. A clump of scrubby trees loomed up. She crashed between the trunks and slithered down into the bushes, her breath rasping. She shivered in the half-light, heart pounding in her chest. It was silent beyond the trees. Good. She reached inside her clothes and pulled out some bread and a strip of meat, soggy from the swim, but still edible. She smiled. She had been keeping half of everything that Yulwe gave her for the last few days. Stupid old bastard. She chuckled to herself between choking mouthfuls. Thought he could get the better of Pharaoh Maljin, did he? Damn, she was thirsty. No help for that now. She could find water later. She was tired, though, very tired. Even Pharaoh got tired. She would rest here for a moment, just a moment. Get the strength back in the legs, then on to. She twitched, annoyed. She could think about the where later. Wherever was best for vengeance. Yes, she crawled through the bushes, sat back against one of the trees. Her eyes closed slowly, by themselves. Just rest for a moment now. Vengeance later. Stupid old bastard, she muttered. Her head dropped sideways. Brother? Pharaoh woke with a start, head knocking against the tree. It was light, too light. Another bright, hot day. How long had she been sleeping? Brother? A woman's voice, not far off. Where are you? Over here. Over here. Pharaoh froze, every muscle tensing. A man's voice, deep and strong. And close, she heard horses' hooves, moving slowly. Several horses, and near. What are you doing, brother? She's close, shouted the man again. Pharaoh's throat tightened. I can smell her. Pharaoh felt in the bushes for her weapons, shoved the sword and the knife through her belt, tucked the other knife up her one, torn sleeve. I can taste her, sister. She's very close, but where? The woman's voice drew nearer. But where? The woman's voice drew nearer. Do you think she can hear us? Perhaps she can, laughed the man. Are you there, Maljin? She threw her quiver over her shoulder and snatched up her bow. We are waiting, he sang, getting closer still, just beyond the trees now. Come out, Maljin, come out and greet us. She bolted away, crashing through the bushes, sprinting across the open ground with desperate speed. There she is, cried the woman from behind. Look at her go! Get her then, shouted the man. The scrubby grassland stretched away unbroken before her. Nowhere to run to. She span around with a snarl, knocking an arrow to her bow. 4 horsemen were spurring towards her. Gurkish soldiers, sun glinting on their tall helmets and the cruel heads of their spears. Behind them, further back, were 2 other riders. A man and a woman. Stop! In the name of the Emperor, one of the horsemen shouted. Fuck your Emperor! Her arrow caught the first of the soldiers through his neck, and he tumbled backwards from the saddle with a shocked gurgle, his spear flying out of his hand. Good shot! Cried the woman. The second rider took an arrow in his chest. His breastplate slowed it, but it still went deep enough to kill. He screamed, dropping his sword in the grass, clutching at the shaft, rolling in the saddle. The third never even made a sound. He got one in the mouth, at no more than 10 strides away. The point went right through his skull and knocked his helmet off, but by then the 4th was on her. She threw the bow to the ground and rolled away as the soldier thrust at her with his spear. Then she pulled the sword from her belt, spitting on the grass. Alive! Shouted the woman, nudging her horse lazily forwards. The soldier turned his snorting mount and urged it cautiously towards Pharaoh. He was a big man, with a thick growth of dark stubble on his jaw. I hope you've made your peace with God, girl, he said. Fuck your God! She scuttled out of the way, dodging, moving, staying close to the ground. The soldier jabbed at her with his spear, keeping her at a distance, his horse hooves pawing at the ground, kicking dust in Pharaoh's face. Poke her! She heard the woman shouting behind her. Yes, poke her! Cried her brother through his giggling, but not too hard. We want her alive. The soldier snarled as he spurred his horse forward. Pharaoh ducked and scrambled in front of its kicking legs. The spear point jabbed, cutting a gash in her arm. She swung the sword with all her strength. The curved blade found the gap between the plates of the soldier's armor, took his leg off just below the knee, and opened a huge wound in the horse's side. Man and beast screamed together, fell together to the ground. Dark blood bubbled out across the dirt. She got him. The woman sounded mildly disappointed. "Up, man," laughed her brother. "Up and at her. There's still a chance." The soldier thrashed on the ground. Pharaoh's sword hacked into his face, putting a sharp end to his screams. Nearby, the second rider was still in his saddle, face twisted, gasping his last breaths, hand clutched around the bloody shaft of her arrow. His horse put its head down and started nibbling at the dry grass by its hooves. "That's all of them," said the woman. "I know." Her brother sighed deep. "Must one do everything oneself?" Pharaoh glanced up at them as she pushed the bloody sword back through her belt. They were sitting carelessly on their horses not far off, the sun bright behind them, smiles on their cruel, handsome faces. They were dressed like lords, silk flapping round them in the breeze, heavy with jewelry, but neither one was armed. Pharaoh scrambled for her bow. "Be careful, brother," said the woman, examining her fingernails. "She fights well, like a devil. But she is no match for me, sister, have no fear." He sprang down from his saddle. "So then, Maljin, shall we?" The arrow stuck him through the chest, deep through, with a hollow thud. Begin the shaft quivered, its point glittering behind him, dry and bloodless. He began to walk towards her. Her next arrow caught him through the shoulder, but he only came on faster, breaking into a run, bounding forward with enormous strides. She dropped the bow, fingers fumbling for the grip of her sword. Too slow. His outstretched arm caught her across the chest with terrible force, slamming her into the earth. "Oh, well done, brother!" The woman clapped her hands with delight. "Well done!" Pharaoh rolled coughing in the dust. She saw the man watching her as she struggled to her feet, the sword clutched in both hands. She swung it at him, a great overhead arc. It bit deep into the earth. Somehow, he had already danced aside. A foot came out of nowhere and sank into her stomach. She doubled over, powerless, the air driven from her body. Her fingers twitched. The sword was left stuck in the ground. Her knees wobbled, and now something crunched into her nose. Her legs buckled and the ground hit her hard in the back. She rolled groggily to her knees, the world turning over around her. There was blood on her face. She blinked and shook her head, trying to stop the world from spinning. The man was moving towards her, tipping, blurry. He jerked her arrow out of his chest and tossed it away. There was no blood, just a little dust. Just dust, curling in the air. An eater, he had to be. Pharaoh stumbled up, pulling the knife from her belt. She thrust at him, missed, thrust again, missed again. Her head was swimming. She screamed, slashing at him with all her might. He caught her wrist in his hand. Their faces were less than a foot apart. His skin was perfect, smooth, like dark glass. He looked young, almost like a child, but his eyes were old, hard eyes. He watched her, curious, amused, like a boy who found an interesting beetle. "She doesn't give up, does she, sister? Very fierce. The prophet will be delighted with her." The man sniffed at Pharaoh and wrinkled his nose. "Ugh, she'd better be washed first." She butted him in the face. His head snapped back, but he only giggled. He caught her round the throat with his free hand, shoved her out to arm's length. She clawed at his face, but his arm was too long. She couldn't reach. He was prizing her fingers from the handle of the knife. His grip was iron around her neck. She couldn't breathe. She bared her teeth, struggling, snarling, thrashing, all in vain. "Alive, brother. We want her alive. Brother, we want her alive." "Alive," murmured the man, but not unharmed. The woman giggled. Pharaoh's feet left the ground, kicking at the air. She felt one of her fingers snap, and the knife dropped to the grass. The hand gripped tighter round her neck, and she tore at it with broken nails. All in vain. The bright world began to turn dark. Pharaoh heard the woman laughing, far away. A face swam out of the darkness. A hand stroked Pharaoh's cheek. The fingers were soft, warm, gentle. "Be still, child," whispered the woman. Her eyes were dark and deep. Pharaoh could feel her breath, hot and fragrant on her face. "You are hurt, you must rest. Be still now. Sleep." Pharaoh's legs were heavy as lead. She kicked weakly one last time, then her body sagged. Her heart beat slow. Rest now. Pharaoh's eyelids began to droop. The woman's beautiful face grew blurred. "Sleep?" Pharaoh bit down hard on her tongue and her mouth turned salty. "Be still." Pharaoh spat blood in the woman's face. "Gah!" she shouted in disgust, wiping blood from her eyes. "She fights me." "Her kind fight everything," came the man's voice, just behind Pharaoh's ear. "Now listen to me, whore," hissed the woman, clutching Pharaoh's jaw with steely fingers and yanking her face this way and that. "You are coming with us, one way or another. You hear me. She goes nowhere." Another voice, deep and mellow. It seemed familiar. Pharaoh blinked, shook her head groggily. The woman had turned, looking at an old man, not far away. Yulwei. His bangles jingled as he padded softly across the grass. "Are you alive, Pharaoh?" "Gosh," she croaked. The woman sneered at Yulwei. "Who are you, old bastard?" Yulwei sighed. "I am an old bastard. Get you gone, dog," shouted the man. "We come from the prophet, from Khalul himself, and she comes with us." Yulwei looked sad. "I cannot change your minds." They laughed together. "Fool," cried the man. "Our minds never change." He let go of one of Pharaoh's arms, took a wary step forwards, dragging her with him. "A shame," said Yulwei, shaking his head. "I would have had you carry my respects to Khalul. The prophet does not walk with the likes of you, beggar. I might surprise you. We knew each other well, long ago." "I will give our master your respects then," jeered the woman. "With the news of your recent death." Pharaoh twisted her wrist, felt the knife drop into her palm. "Oh, Khalul would enjoy that news, but he will not receive it yet. The two of you have cursed yourselves. You have broken the second law. You have eaten the flesh of men, and there must be a reckoning." "Old fool," sneered the woman. "Your laws do not apply to us." Yulwei slowly shook his head. "The word of Uz governs all. There can be no exceptions. Neither one of you will leave this place alive." The air around the old man shimmered, twisted, blurred. The woman gave a gurgle and dropped suddenly to the earth, more than falling, melting, flopping, dark silk flapping around her collapsing body. "Sister!" The man let go of Pharaoh, sprang at Yulwei, arms outstretched. He got no further than a stride. He gave a sudden shrill scream and dropped to his knees, clutching at his head. Pharaoh forced her stumbling feet forward, grabbed hold of his hair with her broken hand and drove the knife into his neck. Dust blew out into the wind, a fountain of dust. Flames flickered around his mouth, charring his lips black, licking burning hot at her fingers. She dropped on top of him, bearing him back onto the ground, choking, snorting. The blade opened up his stomach, scraped against his ribs, snapped off in his chest. Fire licked out. Fire and dust. She hacked at the body mindlessly with a broken knife, long after it had stopped moving. She felt a hand on her shoulder. "He is dead, Pharaoh. They both are dead." She saw it was true. The man lay on his back, staring up at the sky, face charred round his nose and mouth, dust blowing from the gaping wounds. "I killed him." Her voice cracked and broken in her throat. "No, Pharaoh. I did that. They were young eaters, weak and foolish. Still, you are lucky they wanted only to catch you." "I'm lucky," she mumbled, dribbling bloody spit onto the eater's corpse. She dropped the broken knife, crawled away on all fours. The body of the woman lay next to her, if you could call it that, a shapeless, lumpy mass of flesh. She saw long hair and an eye and lips. "What did you do?" she croaked through her bloody mouth. "I turned her bones to water and burned him from the inside. Water for one, fire for the other. Whatever works for their kind." Pharaoh rolled over on the grass, looked up at the bright sky. She held her hand in front of her face, shook it. One of her fingers flopped back and forth. Yulwei's face appeared above, staring down at her. "Does it hurt?" "No," she whispered, letting her arm drop back to the earth. "It never does." She blinked up at Yulwei. "Why does it never hurt?" The old man frowned. "They will not stop seeking for you, Pharaoh. Do you see now why you have to come with me?" She nodded slowly. "The effort was immense." "I see," she whispered. "I see." The world grew dark again. Chapter 5. She loves me. Not. Ah! Cried Jezal, as the point of Filio's steel dug hard into his shoulder. He stumbled back, wincing and cursing, and the Styrian smiled at him and flourished his steels. A touch to Master Filio, bellowed the referee. Tots two each. There was some scattered clapping as Filio strutted back to the contestants' enclosure with an irritating smile across his face. Slippery bastard, Jezal hissed to himself as he followed. He should have seen that lunge coming. He had been careless, and he knew it. Two apiece, hissed Varus, as Jezal flopped down into his chair, breathing hard. Two apiece? Against this nobody? He's not even from the Union. Jezal knew better than to point out that Westport was supposed to be a part of the Union these days. He knew what Varus meant, and so did everyone else in the arena. The man was an outsider as far as they were concerned. He grabbed the cloth from West's outstretched hands and wiped his sweaty face. 5 touches was a long match, but Filio looked far from exhausted. He was springing up and down on his toes as Jezal glanced across, nodding his head to the noisy Styrian advice spilling from his trainer. You can beat him, West murmured, as he handed Jezal the water bottle. You can beat him, and then it's the final. The final, that meant Gorst. Jezal wasn't entirely sure he wanted any of that, but Varus was in no doubt. Just damn well beat him, hissed the marshal as Jezal took a swig from the bottle, swilled it round in his mouth. Just beat him. Jezal spat half out into the bucket and swallowed the rest. Just beat him. Easy to say, but he was a devious bastard, this Styrian. You can do it, said West again, rubbing Jezal's shoulder. You've come this far. Kill him. Just kill him. Marshal Varus stared into Jezal's eyes. Are you a nobody, Captain Luthar? Did I waste my time on you, or are you somebody? Eh? Now's the time to decide. Gentlemen, please, called the referee. The deciding touch. Jezal blew out hard, took his steels from West, got to his feet. He could hear Filio's trainer shouting encouragements over the swelling noise of the crowd. Just kill him, shouted Varus one last time. Then Jezal was off on his way to the circle. The deciding touch, the decider. In so many ways, whether Jezal would be in the final or not, whether he would be somebody or not. He was tired, though, very tired. He had been fencing solidly for nearly half an hour in the heat, and that takes it out of you. He was sweating again already. He could feel it leaking out of his face in big drops. He moved towards his mark, a bit of chalk on some dry grass. Filio was standing there waiting, still smiling, anticipating his triumph. The little shit. If Gorst could club those others around the circle, then surely Jezal could grind this fool's face in the turf. He squeezed the grips of his steels and concentrated on that nauseating little smile. He wished for a moment that the steels weren't blunted, until it occurred to him that he might be the one who got stabbed. Begin? Jezal sorted through his cards, shuffling them this way and that in his hands, barely even looking at the symbols on them, barely caring whether he kept them out of sight of the others. I'll raise you 10, said Caspa, sliding some coins across the table with a look that said, oh, something probably. Jezal didn't care what. He really wasn't concentrating. There was a lengthy pause. It's your bet, Jezal, grumbled Jalenhorn. It is, He scanned across the meaningless symbols, unable to take any of it too seriously. Fold, he tossed the cards onto the table. He was down today, well down, for the first time and he couldn't remember how long, ever probably. He was too busy thinking about RD, wondering how he could better without doing either one of them lasting harm, most particularly without his being killed by West. He was still no closer to an answer, unfortunately. Caspa swept up the coins, smiling broadly at his most unlikely victory. So that was well fought today, Jezal, a close one. But you came through, eh? Said Jezal. He took his pipe from the table. I swear I thought he had you for a minute there, but then, and he snapped his fingers under Brint's nose, just like that. Knocked him right over. The crowd loved it. I laughed so hard I nearly wet myself, I swear. Do you reckon you can beat Gorst? Asked Jalenhorn. Jezal shrugged, lighting the pipe, and leaning back in his chair, looking up at the gray sky and sucking on the stem. You seem pretty calm about it all, said Brint. The 3 officers glanced at each other, disappointed by the failure of their chosen topic. Caspa picked another. Have you fellows seen the Princess Therese yet? Brint and Jalenhorn sighed and gasped. Then the three of them prattled their gormless appreciation of the woman. "Have I seen her? Have I ever? They call her the Jewel of Talons. The rumors didn't lie where she's concerned. I hear the marriage to Prince Ladisla is a fixed thing. The lucky bastard," and so on. Jezal stayed where he was, sat back in his chair, blowing smoke at the sky. He wasn't so sure about Therese, from the little he'd seen. Beautiful from a distance, no doubt. But he imagined that her face would feel like glass to the touch. Cold, hard, and brittle. Nothing like Audie's, still. Jalenholm was spouting, "I have to say, Caspar, my heart still belongs to your cousin Aris. Give me a union girl any day over one of these foreigners." "Give you her money, you mean?" murmured Jezal, head still tipped back. "No," complained the big man. "She's a perfect lady. Sweet, demure, well-bred." Ah, Jezal smiled to himself. If Therese was cold glass, then Aris was a dead fish. Kissing her would be like kissing an old rag, he imagined. Limp and tedious. She couldn't kiss the way Ardie did. No one could. Well, they're both of them beauties, no doubt. Brint was blathering, fine women to dream about, if dreams are all you're after. He leaned forward to a conspiratorial distance, smirking shiftily round as though he had something secret and exciting to say. The other two edged their chairs forward, but Jezal stayed where he was. He had no interest at all in hearing about whatever whore that idiot was betting. "Have you met West's sister?" murmured Brint. Jezal's every muscle stiffened. "She's not the equal of those two, of course, but she's really quite pretty in a common sort of way, and I think she'd be willing." Brint licked his lips and nudged Jalenholm in the ribs. The big man grinned guiltily like a schoolboy at a dirty joke. "Oh yes, she strikes me as the willing type." Caspar giggled. Jezal put his pipe down on the table, noticing that his hand was trembling slightly. The other was gripping the arm of his chair so hard that his knuckles were white. "I do declare," said Brint. "If I didn't think the Major would stick me with his sword, I'd be tempted to stick his sister with mine, eh?" Jalenholm spluttered with laughter. Jezal felt one of his eyes twitching as Brint turned his smirk towards him. "Well, Jezal, what do you think? You've met her, haven't you? What do I think?" His voice seemed to come from a terribly long way away as he stared at those three grinning faces. "I think you should watch your mouth, you son of a fucking whore." He was on his feet now, teeth gritted so tight together they felt like they might crack apart. The three smiles blinked and faded. Jezal felt Caspar's hand on his arm. "Come on." He only meant Jezal ripped his arm away, seized the edge of the table and flung it over. Coins, cards, bottles, glasses flew through the air and spilled out across the grass. He had his sword in his other hand, still sheathed luckily, leaning right down over Brint, spraying spit in his face. "Now you fucking listen to me, you little bastard," he snarled. "I hear anything more like that, anything, and you won't have to worry about West." He pressed the grip of his steel into Brint's chest. "I'll carve you like a fucking chicken." The three men stared up at him, aghast, their mouths wide open, their astonishment at this sudden display of violence equaled only by Jezal's own. "But," said Jalenholm. "What?" "Jalenholm," screamed Jezal, seizing a fistful of the big man's jacket and dragging him half out of his chair. "What do you fucking say?" The fury was draining fast. He had half a mind to apologize, but when he saw Brint's ashen face, all he could think of was, "She strikes me as the willing type. Like, fucking chicken." He snarled again, then turned on his heel and stalked off. Halfway to the archway he realized he had left his coat behind, but he could hardly go back for it now. He made it into the darkness of the tunnel, took a couple of steps down it, then sagged against the wall, breathing hard and trembling as if he'd just run 10 miles. He understood now what it meant to lose one's temper, and no mistake. He had never even realized that he had won before, but there could be no doubt now. What the hell was that about? Brint's shocked voice echoed quietly down the tunnel, only just audible over the thumping of Jezal's heart. He had to hold his breath to hear. "Damned if I know." Jalenholm, sounding even more surprised. There was the rattle and scrape of the table being put straight. "Never knew he had such a temper. I suppose he must have a lot to think about," said Caspar, uncertainly. "What with the contest and all," Brint cut him off. "That's no excuse." "What with the contest and all," Brint cut him off. "That's no excuse." "Well, they're close, aren't they? Him and West?" What with all the fencing together and what have you, maybe he knows the sister or something. I don't know. There is another explanation, Jezal could hear Brint saying, voice tense as though he was about to deliver a punchline. Perhaps he's in love with her. The three of them burst out laughing. It was a good joke, all right. Captain Jezal Dan Luthar, in love, and with a girl whose station in life was so far beneath his own. What a ridiculous idea. What an absurd notion. What a joke. Oh, shit. Jezal put his head in his hands. He didn't feel like laughing. How the hell had she done this to him? How? What was it about her? She was fine to look at, of course, and clever, and funny, and all those things, but that was no explanation. I cannot see her again, he whispered to himself. I will not, and he thumped his hand against the wall. His resolve was iron. It always was, until the next note came under his door. He groaned and slapped the side of his head. Why did he feel like this? Why did he couldn't even bring himself to think the word, like her so much. Then it came to him. He knew why. She didn't like him. Those mocking half-smiles, those sidelong glances he caught sometimes, those jokes that went just a little too close to the bone. Not to mention the occasional examples of outright scorn. She liked his money, maybe. She liked his position in the world, of course. She liked his looks, undoubtedly. But, in essence, the woman despised him. And he'd never had that feeling before. He had always just assumed that everybody loved him, had never really had cause to doubt he was a fine man, worthy of the highest respect. But Artie didn't like him. He saw it now. And that made him think, apart from the jaw, of course, and the money and the clothes, what was there to like? She treated him with the contempt he knew he deserved, and he couldn't get enough of it. Strangest thing, Jezal mumbled to himself, slouching miserably against the wall of the tunnel. Strangest thing. It made him want to change her mind. Chapter 6. The Seed. How are you, Sand? Colonel Glokta opened his eyes. It was dark in the room. Damn it, he was late. Damn it, he shouted, shoving back the covers and leaping out of bed. I'm late. He snatched up his uniform trousers, shoving his legs in, fumbling with his belt. Don't worry about that, Sand! His mother's voice was half-soothing, half-impatient. Where is the seed? Glokta frowned over as he pushed his shirt in. I've no time for this nonsense, Mother. Why do you always think you know what's best for me? He cast around him for his sword, but couldn't see it. We're at war, you know. We are indeed. The colonel looked up, surprised. It was the voice of Arch-Lector Sult. 2 wars, one fought with fire and steel, and another one beneath an old war, long years in the making. Glokta frowned. However could he have mistaken that old windbag for his mother? And what was he doing in Glokta's chambers in any case? Sitting in the chair at the foot of his bed, prattling about old wars? What the hell are you doing in my chambers? Growled Colonel Glokta. And what have you done with my sword? Where is the seed? A woman's voice now, but not his mother's. Someone else. He did not recognize it. He squinted against the darkness, straining to see who was in the chair. He could make out a vague outline, but the shadows were too deep to tell more. Who are you? Asked Glokta sternly. Who was I? Or what am I? The figure in the chair shifted as it rose slowly, smoothly from its seat. I was a patient woman, but I am woman no more, and the grinding years have worn my patience thin. What do you want? Glokta's voice quivered, reedy and weak as he backed away. The figure moved, stepping through the shaft of moonlight from the window, a woman's form, slender and graceful, but shadows stuck to the face. A sudden fear clawed at him, and he stumbled back against the wall, raising his arm to fend the woman off. I want the seed. A pale hand snaked out and closed around his outstretched arm. A gentle touch, but cold. Cold as stone. Glokta trembled, gasped, squeezed shut his eyes. I need it. You cannot know the need I have. Where is it? Fingers plucked at his clothes, quick and deft, seeking, searching, darting in his pockets, in his shirt, brushing his skin. Cold, cold as glass. The seed squeaked Glokta, half paralyzed with terror. You know what I speak of, broken man. Where is it? Laker fell, he whispered. The words welled up, he knew not from where. I know it. Burning, burning, burning. I saw it. The face was close enough for him to feel the breath upon his skin. Cold, cold as frost. He broke upon the bridge below. I remember it. They searched for the seed. Yes, whispered the voice, urgent in his ear. Where is it? Something brushed against his face, his cheek, his eyelid, soft and slimy. A tongue. Cold, cold as ice. His flesh crawled. I don't know. They could not find it. Could not? Fingers closed tight around his throat, squeezing, crushing, choking the air from him. Cold. Cold as iron. And just as hard. You think you know pain, broken man? You know nothing. The icy breath rasped in his ear. The icy fingers squeezed. Squeezed. But I can show you. I can show you! Glokta screamed, thrashed, struggled. He fought his way up, stood for a dizzy instant, then his leg buckled and he plunged into space. The dark room tumbled around him and he crashed to the boards with a sickening crunch, his arm folded beneath him, his forehead cracking against the floor. He struggled up, clawing at the leg of his bed, pushing himself against the wall, snorting for breath, staring wild-eyed towards the chair, yet barely able to look for fear. A bar of moonlight spilled through the window, cut across the rumpled bedclothes and onto the polished wood of the seat. Empty. Glokta cast around the rest of the room, eyes adjusting to the darkness, peering into every shadowy corner. Nothing. Empty. A dream. And now, as the crazy hammering of his heart relaxed, as his ragged breathing slowed, the pain came on. His head thumped, his leg screamed, his arm was throbbing dully. He could taste blood, his eyes stung and wept, his guts heaved, sick and spinning. He whimpered, made an agonizing hop towards the bed, then collapsed on the moonlit mattress, exhausted, wet with cold sweat. There was an urgent knocking at the door. Seer, are you all right? Barnum's voice. The knocking came again. No good. It is locked. Always locked. But I don't think he'll be moving. Frost will have to break it down. But the door swung open, and Glokta shielded his eyes from the sudden ruddy glow of the old servant's lamp. Are you all right? I fell, mumbled Glokta. My arm. The old servant perched on the bed, taking Glokta's hand gently and pushing up the sleeve of his nightshirt. Glokta winced. Barnum clicked his tongue. His forearm had a big pink mark across it, already beginning to swell and redden. I don't think it's broken, said the servant, but I should fetch the surgeon, just in case. Yes, yes. He waved Barnum away with his good hand. Fetch him. Glokta watched the old servant hurry, stooped, out of the door, heard him creaking along the narrow corridor outside, down the narrow stairs. He heard the front door banging shut. Silence descended. He looked over at the scroll he had taken from the Adeptus Historical, still rolled up tight on the dresser, waiting to be delivered to Arch-Lector Sult. The maker fell burning. He broke upon the bridge below. Strange how parts of the waking world stray into one's dreams. That damn Northman and his intruder. A woman and cold. That'll be what set me off. Glokta rubbed his arm gently, pressing the sore flesh with his fingertips. Nothing, just a dream, and yet something was niggling at him. He looked over at the back of the door. The key was still in the lock, shining orange in the light from the lamp. Not locked. And yet I must have locked it. Must have. I always do. Glokta looked back to the empty chair. What did that idiot apprentice say? Magic comes from the other side, the world below, hell. Somehow, at that moment after that dream, it did not seem so difficult to believe. The fear was building in him again. Now he was alone. He stretched out his good hand towards the chair. It took an age to get there, trembling, shaking. His fingers touched the wood, cool, but not cold. Not cold. There is nothing there. He slowly withdrew his hand, cradled his pulsing arm. Nothing. Empty. A dream. What the hell happened to you? Glokta sucked sourly at his gums, fell out of bed. He scratched absently at his wrist through the dressing. Until a moment ago it had been throbbing like hell, but the sight in front of him had pushed the pain into the back of his mind. I could be worse off. A lot worse. Not a pretty sight, not at all. You're damn right it's not. Severard looked as disgusted as was possible with half his face covered. I nearly puked when I first saw it. Me. Glokta peered down, frowning at the tangled mess of butchery, supporting himself against a tree trunk with one hand and pushing some of the ferns aside with the tip of his cane to get a better look. Are we even sure it's a man? Might be a woman. Human, anyway. That's a foot. Ah, so it is. How was it found? He found it. Severard nodded over towards a gardener, sat on the ground, pale-faced and staring, and with a small pool of drying vomit on the grass beside him. In amongst the trees here, hidden in the bushes. Looks as if whatever killed it tried to hide it, but not long ago. It's fresh. It is indeed barely any smell, and only a couple of flies have arrived. Very fresh, perhaps last night even. It might not have been found for days, except someone asked for one of these trees to be pruned. Blocking out the light or something. You ever see anything like this? Glokta shrugged. In England, once, before you came, one of the convicts tried to escape. He made it a few miles, then succumbed to the cold. A bear made free with the corpse. That was quite a mess, though not near as bad as this one. I can't see anyone freezing to death last night. It was hot as hell. Said Glokta. If hell is hot, I've always thought it might be cold. Cold as ice? There are a few bears within the agrient in any case. Do we have any idea as to the identity of this? He waved his cane towards the carcass. Person? None. Is anyone unaccounted for? Reported missing. Not that I've heard. So we have not the slightest idea even who our victim is? Why the hell are we taking an interest? Why the hell are we taking an interest? Don't we have a fake Magus to be watching? That's just it. Their new quarters are right over there. Severed's gloved finger pointed out a building, not 20 strides away. I was watching them when this came to light. Glokta raised an eyebrow. I see. And you suspect some connection, do you? The practical shrugged. Mysterious intruders in the dead of night. Gruesome murders on their very doorstep. Our visitors draw trouble like shit draws flies. Huh? Said Severed, swatting a fly away with his gloved hand. I looked into that other thing as well. Your bankers. Valent and Balk. Glokta looked up. Really? And not a lot? An old house? Very old, and very well respected. Their notes are good as gold among the merchants. They've got offices all across Midderland, England, Sterrickland, in Westport, in Dagaska, even outside the Union. Powerful people, by all accounts. All kind of folk owe them money, I reckon. Strange thing, though, no one seems ever to have met a Valent or a Balk. Who can tell with banks, though, eh? Love secrets. You want me to dig any more? It could be dangerous. Very dangerous. Dig too far and we might be digging our own graves. No, we'd better leave off. For now, keep your ears open, though. My ears are always open, Chief. So who do you like for the contest? Glokta glanced across at the practical. How can you think about that with this in front of you? The practical shrugged. It won't do him any harm, will it? Glokta looked back at the mangled body. I suppose it won't at that. So come on, you should know, Luthar or Gorst. Gorst? I hope he carves the little bastard in two. Really? People say he's a clumsy ox. Lucky is all. Well, I say he's a genius, said Glokta. In a couple of years they'll all be fencing like him, if you can call it fencing. You mark my words, Gorst, eh? Maybe I'll have a little bet. You do that. But in the meantime, you'd better scrape this mess up and take it to the university. Get Frost to give you a hand. He's got a strong stomach. The university. Well, we can't just leave it here. Some fashionable lady taking a turn in the park could get an awful shock. Severed giggled. And I might just know of someone who can shed some light on this little mystery. This is quite an interesting discovery you've made, Inquisitor. The Adeptus Physical paused in his work and peered over at Glokta, one eye enormously magnified through his glittering eyeglass. Quite a fascinating discovery, he muttered, as he returned to the corpse with his instruments, lifting, prodding, twisting, squinting down at the glistening flesh. Glokta peered round the laboratory, his lip curling with distaste. Jars of many different sizes lined 2 of the 4 walls, filled with floating, pickled lumps of meat. Some of those floating things Glokta recognized as parts of the human body. Some he did not. Even he felt slightly uncomfortable in amongst the macabre display. I wonder how Candelao came by them all. Do his visitors end up dismembered, floating in a dozen different jars? Perhaps I would make an interesting specimen. Fascinating. The Adeptus loosened the strap of his eyeglass and perched it on top of his head, rubbing at the pink ring it had left behind around his eye. What can you tell me about it? Glokta frowned. I came here to find out what you can tell me about it. Of course. Candelao pursed his lips. Well, as to the gender of our unfortunate friend, he trailed off. The organs that would allow one to make an easy determination are, and he gestured at the meat on the table, harshly lit under the blazing lamps, absent. And that is the sum of your investigation? Well, there are other things. A man's third finger is typically longer than his first, not necessarily so with a woman, but our remnant does not have all the digits necessary to make such a judgment. As to gender, therefore, without the fingers, we are quite stumped. He giggled nervously at his own joke. Glokta did not. Young or old? Well, again, that is quite difficult to determine, I am afraid. And the Adeptus tapped at the corpse with his tongs. Teeth here are in good condition, and, such skin as remains would appear to be consistent with a younger person, but, this is really just, So what can you tell me about the victim? Well, nothing, and he smiled apologetically. But I have made some interesting discoveries as to the cause of death. Really? Oh yes, look at this. I would rather not. Glokta limped cautiously over to the bench, peering down at the spot the old man was indicating. You see here, the shape of this wound? The Adeptus prodded at a flap of gristle. No, I do not see, said Glokta. It appears all to be one enormous wound to me. The old man leaned towards him, his eyes wide. Human, he said. We know that it is human. This is a foot. No, these teeth marks here. They are human bites. Glokta frowned. Human bites. Absolutely. Candelao's beaming smile was quite at odds with the surroundings. And with the subject matter, I rather think. This individual was bitten to death by another person. And, in all likelihood, and he gestured triumphantly at the mess on his table, considering the incomplete nature of the remains. Partially eaten. Glokta stared at the old man for a moment. Eaten? Why must every question answered raise 10 more? This is what you would have me tell the Archlector. The Adeptus laughed nervously. Well, these are the facts, as I see them. A person, unidentified, perhaps a man, perhaps a woman, either young or old, was attacked in the park by an unknown assailant, bitten to death within 200 strides of the king's palace, and partially eaten. Candelao gave a worried glance sideways towards the entrance. Glokta turned to look, and frowned. There was a new arrival there, one that he had not heard enter, a woman, standing in the shadows at the edge of the bright lamplight with her arms folded. A tall woman with short, spiky red hair, and a black mask on her face, staring at Glokta and the Adeptus through narrowed eyes. A practical, but not one I recognize, and women are quite a rarity in the Inquisition. I would have thought, good afternoon. A man stepped briskly through the door, gaunt, balding, with a long black coat and a prim little smile on his face. An unpleasantly familiar man. Goyle, damn him. Our new superior of Adua arrived at last. Great news, Inquisitor Glokta. He purred, what an absolute pleasure it is to see you again. Likewise, Superior Goyle, you bastard. 2 other figures followed close behind the grinning superior, making the glaring little room seem quite crowded. One was a dark-skinned, stocky Cantic with a big golden ring through his ear. The other was a monster of a Northman, with a face like a stone slab. He almost had to stoop to cram himself through the doorway. Both were masked and dressed from head to toe in Practical's black. This is Practical Vitari, chuckled Goyle, indicating the red-haired woman who had flowed over to the jars and was peering into them, one at a time, tapping on the glass and making the specimens wobble. And these are Practical's Halim. The southerner sidled past Goyle and into the room, busy eyes darting here and there, and Bayer. The monstrous Northman gazed down at Glokta from up near the ceiling. In his own country they call him The stone splitter, would you believe? But I don't think that would work here. Do you, Glokta? Practical stone splitter? Can you imagine? He laughed softly to himself and shook his head. And this is the Inquisition? I had no idea the circus was in town. I wonder if they stand on each other's shoulders, or jump through flaming hoops, a remarkably diverse selection, said Glokta. Oh yes, laughed Goyle. I have picked them up wherever my travels have taken me, my friends? The woman shrugged as she prowled around the jars. The dark-skinned practical inclined his head. The towering Northman simply stood there. Wherever my travels have taken me, chuckled Goyle, just as though everyone else had laughed with him. And I have more besides. It's been quite a time, I do declare. He wiped a tear of mirth from his eye as he moved towards the table in the center of the room. It seemed that everything was a source of amusement to him, even the thing on the bench. But what's all this? A body, unless I'm quite mistaken. Goyle looked up sharply, his eyes sparkling. A body? A death within the city as superior of Adua, surely that falls within my province. Glokta bowed. Naturally, I was not aware that you had arrived, Superior Goyle. Also, I felt that the unusual circumstances of this, unusual. I see nothing unusual. Glokta paused. What game is this chuckling fool playing? Surely you would agree that the violence here is exceptional. Goyle gave a flamboyant shrug. Dogs, asked Glokta, unable to let that one pass. Domestic pets run mad, do you think? Or wild ones which climbed over the walls? The superior only smiled. Whichever you like, Inquisitor. Whichever you like. I'm afraid it could not possibly be dogs. The Adeptus Physical began pompously to explain. I was only just making clear to Inquisitor Glokta. These marks here. And on the skin here, do you see? These are human bites, undoubtedly. The woman sauntered away from the jars, closer and closer to Kandalao, leaning in towards him until her mask was only inches away from his beak of a nose. He slowly trailed off. Dogs, she whispered, then barked in his face. The Adeptus jumped away. Well, I suppose I could have been mistaken, of course. He backed into the enormous Northman's chest, who had moved with surprising speed to position himself directly behind. Kandalao turned slowly around, staring up with wide eyes. Dogs, intoned the giant. Dogs, hummed the southerner in a thick accent. Of course, squeaked Kandalao. Dogs, of course. How foolish I've been. Dogs, shouted Goyle in delight, throwing his hands in the air. The mystery is solved. To Glokta's amazement, 2 of the 3 practicals began politely to applaud. The woman stayed silent. I never believed that I would miss Superior Kaline, but suddenly I am overcome with nostalgia. Goyle turned slowly round, bowing low. My first day here, and already I warm to the work. You can bury this, he said, gesturing to the corpse and smiling broadly at the cringing Adeptus. Best buried, eh? He looked over at the Northman. Back to the mud, as you say in your country. The massive practical showed not the slightest sign that anyone had spoken. The Cantic was standing there, turning the ring through his ear round and around. The woman was peering down at the carcass on the table, sniffing at it through her mask. The Adeptus Physical was backed up against his jars, sweating profusely. Enough of this pantomime. I have work to do. Well, said Glokta stiffly, limping for the door. The mystery is solved. You don't need me any more. Superior Goyle turned to look at him. His good humor suddenly vanished. No, he hissed, furious little eyes nearly popping out of his head. We don't need you any more. Chapter 7. Never bet against a magus. Logen sat in the hot sun, hunched over on his bench, and sweated. The ridiculous clothes did not help with the sweating, or indeed with anything else. The tunic had not been designed to sit down in, and the stiff leather dug painfully into his fruits whenever he tried to move. Fucking thing, he growled, tugging at it for the 20th time. Quay looked hardly more comfortable in his magical garb. The glittering of the gold and silver symbols only served to make his face look the more ill and pallid, his eyes the more twitchy and bulging. He'd hardly spoken a word all morning. Of the 3 of them, only Bayaz appeared to be enjoying himself, beaming round at the surging crowds on the benches, the sunlight shining off his tanned pate. They stood out among the heaving audience like well-rotted fruit, and seemed about as popular. Even though the benches were packed shoulder to shoulder, a small, nervous space had built up around the three of them where no one would sit. The noise was even more crushing than the heat and the crowds. Logen's ears hummed with the din. It was the most he could do to keep from clamping his hands over them, and throwing himself under the bench for cover. Bayaz leaned towards him. "Was this what your duels were like?" He had to shout even though his mouth was barely 6 inches from Logen's ear. Huh? Even when Logen had fought Rud Three Trees, when a good part of Bethed's army had drawn up in a great half-circle to watch, shouting and screaming and hammering their weapons against their shields, when the walls of Ufrith above them had been crammed with onlookers, his audience had not been half this size, not half this noisy. No more than 30 men had watched him kill Shama Heartless, kill him then butcher him like a pig. Logen winced and flinched and hunched his shoulders higher at the memory of it, cutting and licking the blood from his fingers, while the dogmen stared in horror and Bethad laughed and cheered him on. He could taste the blood now, and he shuddered and wiped his mouth. There had been so many fewer people, and yet the stakes had been so much higher. The lives of the fighters, for one thing, and the ownership of land, of villages, of towns, the futures of whole clans. When he'd fought Tulduru, no more than 100 had watched, but perhaps the whole fate of the North had turned on that bloody half-hour. If he'd lost then, if the Thunderhead had killed him, would things be the same? If Black Dow or Harding Grim, or any of those others had put him in the mud, would Bethad have a golden chain now, and call himself a king? Would this union be at war with the North? The thought made his head hurt. "Even more. You all right?" asked Bayaz. Logen mumbled, but he was shivering even in the heat. What were all these people here for? Only to be amused. Few could have found Logen's battles very amusing, except Bethad perhaps, few others. "This isn't like my fights," he muttered to himself. "What's that?" asked Bayaz. Nothing. Nothing." The old man beamed around at the crowd, scratching at his short gray beard. "Who do you think will win?" Logen really didn't much care, but he reckoned that any distraction from his memories was welcome. He peered into the enclosures where the two fighters were getting ready, not far from where he was sitting. The handsome, proud young man they'd met at the gate was one of them. The other was heavy and powerful-looking, with a thick neck and a look almost bored. He shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know anything about this business." "What, you? The Bloody Nine? A champion who fought and won 10 challenges? The most feared man in the North. No opinion." "Surely single combat is the same the world over." Logen winced and licked his lips. The Bloody Nine. That was far in the past, but not far enough for his liking. His mouth still tasted like metal, like salt, like blood. Touching a man with a sword and cutting him open with one are hardly the same things. But he looked the two opponents over again. The proud young man rolled up his sleeves, touched his toes, swiveled his body this way and that, swung his arms round in quick windmills, watched by a stern old soldier in a spotless red uniform. A tall, worried-looking man handed the fighter 2 thin swords, one longer than the other, and he whisked them around before him in the air with impressive speed, blades flashing. His opponent stood there, leaning against the wooden side of his enclosure, stretching his bull neck from side to side without much hurry, glancing round with lazy eyes. "Who?" asked Logen. "The pompous ass from the gate is Luthar. The one who's half asleep is Gorst." It was plain who the crowd preferred. Luthar's name could be heard often in the din, and whoops and claps greeted every movement of his thin swords. He looked quick and deft and clever. But there was something deadly in that big man's waiting slouch, something dark about his heavy-lidded eyes. Logen would rather have fought Luthar, for all his speed. "I reckon Gorst." "Gorst, really?" Bayaz's eyes sparkled. "How about a little bet?" Logen heard a sharp suck of breath from Quai. "Never bet against a Magus," whispered the apprentice. It didn't seem to make much difference to Logen. "What the hell have I got to bet with?" Bayaz shrugged. "Well, let's just say for honor, then, if you like." Logen had never had too much of that, and the little he did have he didn't care about losing. Bremer Dan Gorst. The scattered clapping was smothered by an avalanche of hisses and boos as the great ox shambled towards his mark, half-closed eyes on the ground, big heavy steels dangling from his big heavy hands. Between his short cropped hair and the collar of his shirt, where his neck should have been, there was nothing but a thick fold of muscle. Ugly bastard, Jezal murmured to himself as he watched him go. Damn idiot, ugly bastard. But his curses lacked conviction, even to his own ear. He had watched that man fight 3 bouts and demolish 3 good opponents. One of them had still to leave his sickbed a week later. Jezal had been training for the last few days specifically to counter Gorst's bludgeoning style, Varus and Wes swinging big broom handles at him while he dodged this way and that. More than once one of them had made contact, and Jezal was still smarting from the bruises. "Gorst," offered the referee plaintively, doing his best to wheedle some applause from the audience. But they were having none of it. The boos only became louder, joined by jeers and heckling as Gorst took his mark. "You clumsy ox, get back to your farm and pull a plow, Bremer the brute," and other such. The people stretched back and back and back and back into obscurity. Everyone was there. Everyone in the world, it looked like. Every commoner in the city round the distant edges. Every gentleman, artisan and trader thronging the middle benches. Every noble man or woman in the agrient towards the front. From fifth sons of high-born nobodies to the great magnates of the open and closed councils. The royal box was full. The queen, the 2 princes, Lord Hoff, the Princess Therese. The king even appeared to be awake for once, truly an honor, his goggling eyes staring around in amazement. Out there somewhere were Jezal's father and his brothers, his friends and fellow officers, his entire acquaintance, more or less. RD too, he hoped, watching. All in all, it was quite an audience. "Jezal Dan Luthar," bellowed the referee. The meaningless bibble-babble of the crowd surged into a storm of cheering, a thunderous wave of support. The cries and shouts rang and echoed around the arena, making Jezal's head throb. "Come on, Luthar! Luthar! Kill the bastard!" and other such. "Off you go, Jezal," whispered Marshal Varus in his ear, clapping him on the back and pushing him gently out towards the circle. "Hand, good luck!" Jezal walked in a daze, the noise of the crowd punching at his ears until it seemed his head would split. The training of the last few months flashed through his mind. The running, the swimming, the work with the heavy bar, the sparring, the beam, the endless forms, the punishment, the study, the sweating, and the pain. Just so he could stand here, 7 touches, the first to 4, it all came down to this. He took his mark opposite Gorst and stared into those heavy-lidded eyes. They looked back, cool and calm, seeming almost to stare past him, as though he wasn't there. That needled him, and he pushed the thoughts out of his head and raised high his noble chin. He would not, could not, let this oaf get the better of him. He would show all these people his blood, and his skill, and his mettle. He was Jezal Dan Luthar. He would win. It was an incontestable fact. He knew it. Begin! The first cut sent him reeling, shattering his confidence, his poise, and nearly his wrist. He had been watching Gorst fence, of course, if you could call it that, so he knew the man would come out swinging. But nothing could have prepared him for that first shattering contact. The crowd gasped with him as he staggered back. All his carefully laid plans, all of Vara's carefully worded advice, vanished into air. He winced with pain and shock, his arms still vibrating from the force of that mighty blow, his ears still ringing from the crashing noise of it, his mouth hanging open, his knees wobbling. It was hardly the most promising start. But the next chop followed hard after the first, flashing down with even greater power. Jezal leaped aside and slid away, trying to make room and give himself time. Time to work out some tactic, some trick to stem the pitiless tide of swinging metal. But Gorst was not about to give him time. He was already loosing another throaty growl, his long steel already begun on its next irresistible arc. Jezal dodged where he could, blocked where he couldn't, his wrists already aching from the ceaseless punishment. To begin with, he hoped that Gorst would tire. No one could throw those great lumps of metal around for long the way that he was doing. Soon the fierce pace would take its toll on the big man, and he would slow and droop, and the heavy steels would lose their venom. Then Jezal would fight back doggedly, run his opponent ragged, and win. The crowd would crack the agreement with their cheers, a classic tale of victory against the odds. Only Gorst did not tire. The man was a machine. After a few minutes there was still not the slightest sign of weariness in those heavy-lidded eyes. There was barely any emotion of any kind that Jezal could see. During the rare moments when he dared to take his eyes away from the flashing swords, the big long steel swung in its brutal circles. And the short steel was always there to turn away such feeble efforts as Jezal could make in between, never faltering or dropping even an inch. The power of the blows did not decrease. The growls tore from Gorst's throat with as much vigor as ever. The crowd were given nothing to cheer at, and merely muttered angrily. It was Jezal who began to feel his legs slowing, to feel the sweat springing out of his forehead, to feel his grip on his steels slipping. He saw it coming from a mile away, but there was nothing he could do about it. He had backed off until he ran out of circle. He had blocked and parried until he lost the feeling in his fingers. This time, when he raised his aching arm, and there was the crash of metal on metal, one tired foot slipped, and he tumbled squawking from the ring, floundering on his side, his short steel spinning from his twitching fingers. His face slapped against the ground, and he took a gritty mouthful of sand. It was a painful and embarrassing fall, but he felt too tired and too battered to be all that disappointed. He was almost relieved that the punishment was over, if only for a moment. "One to Gorst!" shouted the referee. A light dusting of applause was crushed beneath hoots of derision, but the big man seemed scarcely to notice, shuffling back to his mark with his head down, and already preparing for the next touch. Jezal rolled slowly onto his hands and knees, flexing his aching hands and taking his time getting up. He needed a moment to breathe and make ready, to think up some strategy. Gorst waited for him. Big, silent, still. Jezal brushed the sand from his shirt, mind racing. How to beat him? How? He stepped cautiously back to his mark, raised his steels. "Begin." This time Gorst came out even harder, slashing away as if he was scything wheat, making Jezal dance around the circle. One blow passed so close to his left side that he could feel the wind from it on his cheek. The next missed him by a margin no greater on his right. Then Gorst flung a sideways sweep aimed at his head, and Jezal saw an opening. He ducked beneath it, sure the blade tore at the hairs on top of his scalp. He closed the distance as the heavy long steel swung away, almost catching the referee in the face on the back swing, leaving Gorst's right side all but undefended. Jezal lunged at the big bastard. Sure he had finally got through, knowing he had made it one touch apiece. But Gorst caught the thrust on his short steel and forced it just wide, the guards of the two blades scraping then locking together. Jezal cut at him viciously with his short steel, but somehow Gorst blocked that too, bringing up his other sword just in time, catching Jezal's blade and holding it just short of his chest. For a moment their four steels were locked together, hilts grating, their faces just a few inches apart. Jezal was snarling like a dog, teeth bared, the muscles of his face a rigid mask. Gorst's heavy features showed little sign of effort. He looked like a man having a piss, involved in a mundane and faintly distasteful task that must simply be done with as quickly as possible. For a moment, their blades were locked together, Jezal pushing with every grain of strength, each hard-trained muscle flexing, legs straining against the ground, stomach straining to twist his arms straining to push his hands gripped around the hilts of his steels like grim death. Every muscle, every sinew, every tendon. He knew he had the better position. The big man was off balance, if only he could push him back a step, an inch. For that moment their steels were locked together. Then Gorst dipped his shoulder, and grunted, and flung Jezal away as a child might fling away a boring toy. He tumbled back, mouth and eyes wide open with surprise, feet kicking at the dirt, all his attention focused on staying upright. He heard Gorst growl again, and was shocked to see the heavy long steel already curving through the air towards him. He was in no position to dodge, and there was no time anyway. He raised his left arm on an instinct, but the thick, blunted blade tore his short steel away like a straw on the wind and crashed into his ribs, hammering the breath from his body in a wail of pain that echoed round and round a silent arena. His legs crumpled under him, and he sprawled out on the turf, limbs flopping, sighing like a split bellows. This time there was not even the shadow of applause. The crowd roared their hatred, booing and hissing at Gorst for all they were worth as he trudged back to his enclosure. "Damn you, Gorst! You thug! Get up, Luthar! Up and go home, you brute! You damn savage!" Their hisses turned to half-hearted cheers as Jezal picked himself up off the grass, his whole left side pulsing. He would have screamed with the pain if he had any breath left in him. For all his effort, for all his training, he was utterly outclassed, and he knew it. The thought of doing it all again next year made him want to vomit. He did his best to appear undaunted as he struggled back to his enclosure, but he could not help sagging down heavily in his chair when he got there, dropping his notched steels on the flags and gasping for breath. West bent over him and pulled up his shirt to check the damage. Jezal peered down gingerly, half expecting to see a great hole caved in his side, but there was only an ugly red welt across his ribs, some bruising already coming up around it. "Anything broken?" asked Marshal Varus, peering over West's shoulder. Jezal fought back the tears as the major probed his side. "I don't think so, but damn it." West threw his towel down in disgust. "You call this the beautiful sport? Is there no rule against these heavy steels?" Varus shook his head grimly. "They all have to be the same length, but there's no rule for the weight. I mean, why would anyone want heavy ones? Now we know, don't we?" snapped West. "Are you sure we shouldn't stop this before that bastard takes his head off?" Varus ignored him. "Now look here," said the old marshal, leaning down to talk in Jezal's face. "It's the best of 7 touches, first to 4. There's still time. Time for what? For Jezal to get cut in half, blunted steels or no." "He's too strong," Jezal gasped. "Too strong? No one's too strong for you." But even Varus looked doubtful. "There's still time. You can beat him." The old marshal tugged at his mustaches. "You can beat him." But Jezal noticed he did not suggest how. Glokta was becoming worried he might choke, so convulsive was his laughter. He tried to think of something he would rather see than Jezal Dan Luthar being smashed around a fencing circle, and failed. The young man winced as he just barely blocked a raking cut. He had not been handling his left side at all well since he took that blow in the ribs, and Glokta could almost feel his pain. And my, how nice it is to feel someone else for a change. The crowd sulked, silent and brooding, as Gorst harried their favorite around with his brutal slashes, while Glokta spluttered giggles through his clenched gums. Luthar was quick and flashy, and he moved well once he saw the steels coming. A competent fighter. Good enough to win a contest, no doubt, in a mediocre year. Quick feet and quick hands, but his mind is not as sharp as it should be, as it needs to be. He is too predictable. Gorst was an entirely different proposition. He seemed to be swinging and swinging without a thought in his head, but Glokta knew better. He has a whole new way of doing things. It was all jab, jab in my day. By next year's contest, they'll all be chopping away with these big, heavy steels. Glokta wondered idly if he could have beaten Gorst at his best. It would have been a bout worth seeing anyway, a damn sight better than this mismatch. Gorst easily dealt with a couple of limped jabs. Then Glokta winced and the crowd hissed as Luthar just barely parried another great butcher's chop, the force of it nearly lifting him off his feet. He had no way to avoid the next swing, pressed against the edge of the circle as he was, and he was forced to jump back into the sand. 3-0, shouted the referee. Glokta shook with merriment as he watched Luthar chop at the ground in frustration, sending up a petulant spray of sand, his face a picture of pale self-pity. "Dear me, Captain Luthar, it will be 4-0. A whitewash. An embarrassment. Perhaps this will teach that whining little shit some humility. Some men are better off for a good beating. Only look at me, eh? Begin." The 4th touch began precisely as the 3rd had ended, with Luthar taking a hammering. Glokta could see it. The man was out of ideas. His left arm was moving slowly, painfully. His feet looked heavy. Another numbing blow crashed against his long steel, making him stumble back towards the edge of the circle, off balance and gasping. Gorst needed only to press his attack a little further, and something tells me he is not the man to let up when he's ahead. Glokta grabbed his cane, pushed himself to his feet. Anyone could see it was all over, and he had no wish to be caught in the crush as the disappointed crowds all tried to leave at once. Gorst's heavy, long steel flashed down through the air. The final blow, surely. Luthar's only choice was to try and block it and be knocked clean out of the circle. Or it might just split his fat head. We can hope for that. Glokta smiled, half turned to leave. But, out of the corner of his eye somehow, he saw the cut miss. Gorst blinked as his heavy, long steel thudded into the turf, then grunted as Luthar caught him across the leg with a left-handed cut. It was the most emotion he had shown all day. "One to Luthar!" shouted the referee after a brief pause, unable to entirely keep the amazement out of his voice. "No," murmured Glokta to himself, as the crowd around him erupted into riotous applause. "No." He had fought hundreds of touches in his youth, and watched thousands more, but he had never seen anything quite like that, never seen anyone move so quickly. Luthar was a good swordsman, he knew it, but no one is that good. He frowned as he watched the two finalists come out from their second break and take their marks. Begin. Luthar was transformed. He harried Gorst with furious lightning jabs, giving him no time to get started. It was the big man now who seemed stretched to the limit, blocking, dodging, trying to stay out of reach. It was as though they had sneaked the old Luthar away in the break and replaced him with a different man altogether. A stronger, faster, far more confident twin brother. Solon denied something to cheer for. The crowd whooped and yelled as though they'd split their throats. Glokta did not share their enthusiasm. Something is wrong here. Something is wrong. He glanced across the faces nearby, but no one else had sensed anything amiss. They only saw what they wanted to see. Luthar giving the ugly brute a spectacular and well-deserved thrashing. Glokta's eyes scanned across the benches, not knowing what he was looking for. Bayaz, so-called, sitting near the front, leaning forward and staring at the two fighters with fixed concentration, his apprentice and the scarred Northman beside him. No one else noticed it. Everyone was intent on the fighters before them, but Glokta did. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. Something wrong. Say one thing for the first of the Magi. Say he's a cheating bastard, growled Logen. Bayaz had a little smile at the corner of his mouth as he mopped the sweat from his forehead. Whoever said he wasn't? Luthar was in trouble again. Bad trouble. Bad trouble. Mui. Each time he blocked one of those heavy sweeps, his sword snapped back further. His grip seemed slacker. Each time he dodged, he ended up a little further back towards the edge of the yellow circle. Then, when the end seemed certain, out of the corner of his eye, Logen saw the air above Bayaz's shoulders shimmer, as it had on the road south when the trees burned, and he felt that strange tugging at his guts. Luthar seemed suddenly to find new vigor. He caught the next great blow on the grip of his short sword. A moment before, it might easily have sent the thing flying from his hand. Now he held it there for an instant, then flung it away with a cry, pushing his opponent off balance and jumping forward, suddenly on the attack. "If you were caught cheating in a northern duel," growled Logen, shaking his head, "I'd cut the bloody cross into your stomach and pull your guts out." "Lucky for me," murmured Bayaz through gritted teeth, without taking his eyes away from the fighters, "that we are in the north no longer." Sweat was already beating his bald scalp again, running down his face in fat drops. His fists were clenched tight and trembling with effort. Luthar struck furiously, again and again, his swords a flashing blur. Gorst grunted and growled as he turned the blows away, but Luthar was too quick for him now, and too strong. He drove him mercilessly across the circle like a crazy dog might drive a cow. "Fucking cheating," growled Logen again, as Luthar's blade flashed and left a bright red line across Gorst's cheek. A few drops of blood spattered across into the crowd on Logen's left, and they exploded into riotous cheering. That, just for a moment, was a shadow of his own duels. The referee's cry of 3 apiece could hardly be heard at all. Gorst frowned slightly and touched one hand to his face. Above the din, Logen could just hear Quay's whisper. Never bet against a Magus. Jezal knew that he was good, but he had never dreamed he could be this good. He was sharp as a cat, nimble as a fly, strong as a bear. His ribs no longer hurt. His wrists no longer hurt. All trace of tiredness had left him, all trace of doubt. He was fearless, peerless, unstoppable. The applause thundered around him, and yet he could hear every word of it, see every detail of every face in the crowd. His heart was pumping tingling fire instead of blood. His lungs were sucking in the very clouds. He did not bother even to sit in the break. So great was his eagerness to get back into the circle. The chair was an insult to him. He was not listening to what Varuz and West were saying. They were of no importance. Little people, far below. They stared at him, flushed, amazed, as well they might be. He was the greatest swordsman ever. That crippled Glokta could not have known how right he was. Jezal had only to try, it seemed, and he could have anything he wanted. He chuckled as he danced back to the mark. He laughed as he heard the crowds cheer. He smiled at Gorst as he stepped back into the circle. All was precisely as it should be. Those eyes were still heavy-lidded, lazy above the little red cut that Jezal had given him. But there was something else there now as well. A trace of shock, of wariness, of respect. As well there might be. There was nothing that Jezal could not do. He was invincible. He was unstoppable. He was completely lost. The pain lanced through his side and made him gasp. Suddenly he was afraid and tired and weak again. Gorst growled and unleashed his savage cuts, jarring the steels in Jezal's hands, making him jump like a frightened rabbit. The mastery was gone. The anticipation, the nerve, and Gorst's onslaught was more brutal than ever. Jezal was bludgeoned to his knees. The crowd gasped. It was all over. It was not over. The blow was arcing down towards him. The final blow. It seemed to drift. Slow, slow, as though through honey. Jezal smiled. It was a simple matter for him to push it away with his short steel. The strength flowed again. He sprang upwards, shoved Gorst away with his empty hand, flicked another swing aside, and then another, his one sword doing the work of two with time to spare. The arena was breathless, silent, but for the rapid clashing of the steels. Right and left went the short blade, flashing faster than his eye could follow, faster than his mind could think, seeming almost to be dragging him along behind it. There was a squeal of metal on metal as it tore Gorst's notched long steel from his hand, then another as it flickered across and did the same with his short. For a moment, all was still. The big man, disarmed and with his heels on the very edge of the circle, looked up at Jezal. The crowd was silent. Then Jezal slowly lifted his short steel, all of a sudden seeming to weigh a ton, and poked Gorst gently in the ribs with it. "Ah," said the big man quietly, raising his eyebrows. Then the crowd exploded into deafening applause. The noise went on, rising and rising, washing over Jezal in waves. Now that it was finished, he felt drained beyond description. He closed his eyes, swaying. His sword dropped from his nerveless fingers and he sank to his knees. He was beyond exhaustion. It was as though he had used a whole week's energy in a few moments. Even kneeling was an effort he was not sure he could sustain for long, and if he fell, he was not sure he could ever get up again. But then he felt strong hands taking him under the arms, and felt himself being lifted. The noise of the crowd grew even louder as he was hoisted into the air. He opened his eyes. Blurry color flashed in front of him as he was turned around. His head rang with the sound. He was up on someone's shoulders, a shaved head, Gorst. The big man had lifted him up, as a father might lift his child, displaying him to the crowd, smiling up at him with a big, ugly grin. Jezal smiled back despite himself. It was a strange moment. All in all, Luthar wins, cried the referee pointlessly, barely audible. Luthar wins. The cheering had resolved itself into a steady chant of Luthar. Luthar! Luthar! The arena shook with it. Jezal's head swam with it. It was like being drunk on victory, drunk on yourself. Gorst lowered him back to the circle as the cheering of the crowd began to fade. You beat me, he said, smiling wide. His voice was strangely high and soft, almost like a woman's. Fair and square. I'd like to be the first to congratulate you. And he nodded his big head and smiled again, rubbing at the cut under his eye without the slightest bitterness. You deserve it, he said, holding out his hand. Thank you. Jezal flashed a sour smile and gave the man's big paw as cursory a squeeze as possible. Then he turned away towards his enclosure. Of course he fucking deserved it, and he was damned if he would let that bastard bask in his reflected glory a moment longer. "Bravely done, my boy. Bravely done, my boy. Bravely done," frothed Marshal Varus, slapping him on the shoulder as he stumbled back to his chair on wobbly legs. "I knew you could do it." West grinned as he handed him the towel. "They'll be talking about this for years." Other well-wishers crowded in, offering their congratulations, leaning over the barrier. A whirl of smiling faces, and in amongst them the face of Jezal's father, shining with pride. "I knew that you could do it, Jezal. I never doubted." "Not for a minute. You've brought honor to our family." Jezal noticed that his elder brother didn't look all that pleased about it, though. He had the usual stodgy, envious expression on his face, even at Jezal's moment of victory. The stodgy, envious bastard. Could he not be happy for his brother if only for one day? "May I, too, congratulate the winner?" came a voice from over his shoulder. It was that old idiot, the one from the gate, the one whom Sulphur had called his master, the one who had used the name Biaz. He had sweat on his bald skull, a lot of it. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, almost as if he had just done 7 touches with Gorst. "Well done indeed, my young friend. An almost magical performance." "Thank you," muttered Jezal. He was not at all sure who this old man was or what he was after, but he did not trust him in the least. "I am sorry, though. I must, of course. We will talk later." He said it with a disturbing finality, as if it were a thing already arranged. Then he turned away and vanished smoothly into the crowds. Jezal's father stared after him, ashen-faced now, as though he had seen a ghost. "Do you know him, father?" Jezal." Varus grabbed his arm excitedly. "Come, the king wishes to congratulate you." He dragged Jezal from his family and towards the circle. A scattering of applause rose up again as they walked together across the dry grass, the scene of Jezal's victory. The Lord Marshal slung a fatherly arm around his shoulder and smiled up at the crowds as though the applause was all for him. Everyone wanted a piece of his glory, it seemed, but Jezal was able to shake the old man off as he mounted the steps of the royal box. Prince Renault, youngest son of the king, was first in line, humbly dressed, honest and thoughtful seeming, scarcely looking like royalty at all. "Well done!" he shouted over the roar of the crowd, sounding truly delighted for Jezal's victory. "Well done indeed." His older brother was more exuberant. "Incredible!" shouted Crown Prince Ladisla, the sunlight glinting off the golden buttons on his white jacket. "Capital! Amazing! Spectacular! I never saw such a thing." Jezal grinned and bowed humbly as he went past, hunching his shoulders as the crown prince slapped him somewhat too hard on the back. "I always knew you'd do it. You were always my man." The Princess Therese, only daughter of the Grand Duke Orso of Talons, watched Jezal pass with a tiny, disdainful smile, tapping 2 languid fingers against her palm in a quarter-hearted imitation of clapping. Her chin was raised painfully high, as though just to be looked at by her was an honor he could never fully appreciate, and certainly did not deserve. And so he came at last to the high seat of Guslav V, High King of the Union. His head was slumped sideways, squashed down under the sparkling crown. His pasty pale fingers twitched on his crimson silk mantle like white slugs. His eyes were closed, chest rising and falling gently, accompanied by gentle splutterings as spittle issued from his slack lips and ran down his chin, joining the sweat on his bulging jowls and helping it to turn his high collar dark with wet. Truly, Jezal was in the presence of greatness. "Your Majesty," murmured Lord Hoff. The head of state did not respond. His wife, the queen, looked on, painfully erect, a fixed, emotionless smile plastered across her well-powdered face. Jezal hardly knew where to look and settled on his dusty shoes. The Lord Chamberlain coughed loudly. A muscle twitched beneath the sweaty fat on the side of the king's face, but he did not wake. Hoff winced, and glancing around to make sure no one was watching too closely, jabbed the royal ribs with his finger. The king jumped, eyelids suddenly flicking wide open, heavy jowls wobbling, staring at Jezal with wild, bloodshot, red-rimmed eyes. "Your Majesty, this is Captain." "Renault!" exclaimed the king. "My son!" Jezal swallowed nervously, doing his best to maintain a rigid smile of his own. The senile old fool had mistaken him for his younger son. Worse yet, The prince himself was standing not 4 paces away. The queen's wooden grin twitched slightly. Princess Therese's perfect lips twisted with scorn. The Lord Chamberlain gave an awkward cough. Without any warning, the monarch struggled to his feet and folded Jezal in an enthusiastic embrace, his heavy crown slipping over to one side of his head, and one of its jewel-encrusted prongs nearly poking Jezal in the eye. Lord Hoff's jaw opened silently. The 2 princes goggled. Jezal could only manage a helpless gurgle. "My son," blubbered the king, his voice choked with emotion. "Reynald, I'm so glad you're back. When I am gone, Ladisla will need your help. He is so weak, and the crown is such a heavy weight. You are always the better suited for it." "Such a heavy weight," he sobbed into Jezal's shoulder. It was like a hideous nightmare. Ladisla and the real Reynald gawped at each other, then back at their father, both looking sick. Therese was sneering down her nose at her prospective father-in-law with undisguised contempt. From bad to much, much worse. What the hell did one do in such a situation? Could there possibly be any etiquette devised for this? Jezal patted his king awkwardly on his fat back. What else could he do? Shove the senile old idiot over on his arse, with half of his subjects looking on? He was almost tempted to do it. It was a small mercy that the crowds took the king's embrace for a ringing endorsement of Jezal's fencing abilities, and drowned out his words with a fresh wave of cheering. No one beyond the royal box heard what he said. They all missed the full significance of what was, without doubt, the most embarrassing moment of Jezal's life. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.